I'm trying to open up my Twitch. Twitch. Activity. Hero 5th is streaming. Would you like to watch? Huh. So, yeah, somebody I don't know apparently gifted me a month sub. That's interesting. What do you mean, no? 6-horned Taurus? I don't know who that is. Oh, I don't remember that by their name. I'm sorry. Don't get mad at me. I have 3 followers. I need to focus. I'm trying to look up you. I'm zoning out. There we go. It says you're streaming Diablo. There we go. El Diablo. You're just so panicked. Blind. I'm reading blind. If I read it in Braille, do I go beep, 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 beep? I can't be quiet. I'm supposed to be reading. Okay. You're gonna be starting the silver chair. Ooh. They've got another map. I gotta take a picture. Map. I don't remember where my camera is. Gosh. Phone, cooperate. Okay. Etinsmoor. Narnia Harfang map of wildlands of the north. I assume that means that giants. The sea. Get this. Went nicely lined up. And ruined city of the giants. Ooh. Actually, there's the lantern waste. Oh, we're gonna read about that. So the lantern was northern of Narnia. River Shribble. To the map. Where is Discord? I sent you a map. Giant bridge. I mean, you gotta give him props for basic. What is in the map? Marshes, gorge, sea, giant bridge, great river. It's like, you're gonna critique my map? You write your own book. Squeaky table. Are the ads done? Ooh. You keep giving me these rare picks that I can't afford. For Pokemon. They're gonna use all my gold. really get the Pokemon's little like the, is it called Wonder Picks? Yeah, the Wonder Picks thing, because it's like you can favorite a card you want, puts a heart on it. It's fine. And there's a little symbol in the bottom left showing what cards you don't have, which is fine. But you can't favorite or wishlist a card if you already own it. So really, the wishlist only signifies cards you don't have, and if that's the case, why even have the little symbol on the bottom left? Or even have the feature to add the heart? Is that expired? Already picked. Well, I might as well waste the gold on it. It's so painful. 17 gold. Nope. 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 Closing this. Stupid captures. Oh no, I closed Twitch. Shit. Reopen. There we go. Alright, can't full screen because then I can't see chat. Can I see chat? Aha. No. What's that? Oh, right, because I can see chat on your stream starting. Why does it say Ceequin's a new subscriber? Oh, right, follower and subscriber, right, because someone gifted me a sub. So dumb. I was like, did I lose my Pokemon place? No. Focus on book. Sweet. To like the pretty image. Yeah. I'm a sock puppet now. I really need to finish making the art for that. What? Wait, what? No, it's a new map. Yeah. Very big. You have the power of paint. Who will? Reading books. Look, a book. What? Tonight we will be reading this. It says, A Map of the Wildlands of Narnia. For 4 hours. I was like, I've already read one of the 4 things on the page, so we will wait an hour and I will read another one. No, the ad's finished. Hello? Has the ad finished? Okay. Hello, people. So last week we finished off the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and that would have had Edward, Lucy, and I forgot his name. No, not Edmund. Say it. Not the book. I forgot his name. Eustace. His name was Eustace. So Lucy's cousin, I believe. Lucy and Edmund's cousin. They had returned back to home, and now we are going to be starting the next book in the series. Again, we're reading in Chronological order, not in publishing order. We'll be reading The Silver Chair, starting it off. So on chapter 1, Behind the Gym. It was a dull autumn day, and Jill Pole was crying behind the gym. She was crying because they had been bullying her. This is not going to be a school story, so I shall say as little as possible about Jill's school, which is not a pleasant subject. It was co-educational, a school for both boys and girls, what used to be called a mixed school. Some said it was not nearly so mixed as the minds of the people who ran it. The people had the idea that boys and girls should be allowed to do what they liked, and unfortunately, what 10 or 15 of the biggest boys and girls liked best was bullying the others. All sorts of things, horrid things, went on, which at an ordinary school would have been found out and stopped in half a term. But at this school, they weren't. Or even if they were, the people who did them were not expelled or punished. The head said they were. The head said that they were interesting psychological cases and sent for them and talked to them for hours. And if you knew the right sort of things to say to the head, the main result was that you became rather a favorite than otherwise. That was why Jill Pole was crying on that dull autumn day on the damp little path which runs between the back of the gym and the shrubbery. And she hadn't nearly finished her cry when a boy came round the corner of the gym whistling, with his hands in his pockets. He nearly ran into her. "Can't you look where you're going?" said Jill Pole. "All right," said the boy. "You needn't start." And then he noticed her face. "I say, Pole," he said. "What's up?" Jill only made faces, the sort you make when you're trying to say something, but find that if you speak, you'll start crying again. "It's them, I suppose, as usual," said the boy grimly, digging his hands farther into his pockets. Jill nodded. There was no need for her to say anything. Even if she could have said it, they both knew. "Now, look here," said the boy. "There's no good us all." He meant well, but he did talk rather like someone beginning a lecture. Jill suddenly flew into a temper, which is quite likely a thing to happen if you have been interrupted in a cry. "Oh, go away and mind your own business," she said. "Nobody asked you to come barging in, did they? And you're a nice person to start telling us what we ought to do, aren't you? I suppose you mean we ought to spend our time sucking up to them and currying favor and dancing attendance on them like you do." "Oh, Lord," said the boy, sitting down on the grass bank at the edge of the shrubbery, and very quickly getting up again because the grass was soaking wet. His name, unfortunately, was Eustace Scrubb, but he wasn't a bad sort. "Pole," he said, "is that fair? Have I been doing anything of the sort this term? Didn't I stand up to Carter about the rabbit? And didn't I keep the secret about Spivins, under torture, too? And didn't I don't know, and I don't care," sobbed Jill. Scrub saw that she wasn't quite herself yet, and very sensibly offered her a peppermint. He had one, too. Presently, Jill began to see things in a clear light. "I'm sorry, Scrub," she said presently. "It wasn't fair. You have done all that this term." "Then wash out last term if you can," said Eustace. "I was a different chap then. I was, gosh, what a little tick I was." "Well, honestly, you were," said Jill. "You think there hasn't been a change then?" said Eustace. "It's not only me," said Jill. "Everyone's been saying so. They've noticed it. Eleanor Blackenston heard Adela Pennyfather talking about it in our changing room yesterday. She said, 'Someone's got a hold of that Scrub kid. He's quite unmanageable this term. We shall have to attend to him next.'" Eustace gave a shudder. Everyone at Experiment House knew what it was like to attend. Everyone at Experiment House knew what it was like being attended to by them. Both children were quite quiet for a moment. Ah! I dropped my book. Both children were quiet for a moment. The drops dripped off the laurel leaves. "Why were you so different last term?" said Jill presently. "A lot of queer things happened to me in the holes," said Eustace mysteriously. "What sort of things?" asked Jill. Eustace didn't say anything for quite a long time. Then he said, "Look here, Pole. You and I hate this place about as much as anybody can hate anything, don't we?" "I know I do," said Jill. Wait, wasn't Eustace homeschooled? He was. Wait, wasn't he? Huh. Now I'm confused. Whatever. I thought it mentioned in the last book that he was homeschooled or something by his mom. Whatever. "I know I do," said Jill. "Then I really think I can trust you." "Damn good of you," said Jill. "Yes, but this is a really terrific secret. Paul, I say, are you good at believing things? I mean, things that everyone here would laugh at? I've never had the chance, said Jill, but I think I would be. Could you believe me if I said I'd been right out of this world? Outside this world, last holes? I wouldn't know what you meant. Well, don't let's bother about worlds then. Supposing I told you I'd been at a place where animals can talk and where there are, enchantments and dragons and, well, all sorts of things you have in fairy tales. Scrub felt terribly awkward as he said this and got red in the face. How did you get there? Said Jill. She also felt curiously shy. The only way you can, by magic, said Eustace almost in a whisper. I was with two cousins of mine. We were just whisked away. They'd been there before. Now that they were talking in whispers, Jill somehow felt it easier to believe. Then suddenly a horrible suspicion came over her, and she said, so fiercely that for a moment she looked like a tigress, If I find you've been pulling my leg, I'll never speak to you again. Never, never, never. I'm not, said Eustace. I swear I'm not. I swear by everything. When I was at school, one would have said I swear by the Bible, but Bibles are not encouraged at Experiment House. All right, said Jill. I'll believe you. And tell nobody. What do you take me for? They were very excited as they said this, but when they said it, and Jill looked around and saw the dull autumn sky and heard the drip off the leaves, and thought of all the hopelessness of Experiment House, it was a 13-week term, and there were still 11 weeks to come, she said, But after all, what's the good? We're not there, we're here, and we jolly well can't get there, or can we? That's what I've been wondering, said Eustace. When we came back from that place, someone said that the two Pevensies kids, that's my two cousins, could never go there again. It was their third time, you see. I suppose they've had their share, but he never said I couldn't. Surely he would have said so, unless he meant that I was going to get back. Surely he would have said so, unless he meant that I was to get back. And I can't help wondering, can we? Could we? Do you mean do something to make it happen? Eustace nodded. You mean we might draw a circle in the ground and write things in queer letters in it and stand inside it and recite charms and spells? Well, said Eustace after he had thought hard for a bit, I believe that was the sort of thing I was thinking of, though I never did it. But now that it comes to the point, I have an idea that all those circles and things are rather rot. I don't think he'd like them. It would look as if we thought we could make him do things, but really we can only ask him. Who is this person you keep on talking about? They call him Aslan in that place, said Eustace. What a curious name. Not half so curious as himself, said Eustace solemnly. But let's get on. It can't do any harm just asking. Let's stand side by side like this, and we'll hold out our arms in front of us with the palms down, like we did in Ramandu Island. Whose island? I'll tell you about it another time. And he might like us to face the east. Let's see, where is the east? I don't know, said Jill. An extraordinary thing about girls is they never know the points of the compass, said Eustace. You don't know either, said Jill indignantly. Yes, I do, if only you didn't keep on interrupting. I've got it now. That's the east, facing up into the laurels. Now, will you say the words after me? What words? The words I'm going to say, of course. Now. And he began, Aslan, Aslan, Aslan. Aslan, 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 repeated Jill. Please let us two go into. At that moment, a voice from the other side of the gym was heard shouting out, Pole? Yes, I know where she is. She's blubbering behind the gym. Shall I fetch her out? Jill and Eustace gave one glance at each other, dived under the laurels, and began scrambling up the steep, earthy slope of the shrubbery at speed which did them great credit. Owing to the curious methods of teaching at Experiment House, one did not learn much French or maths or Latin or things of that sort, but one did learn a lot about getting away quickly and quietly when they were looking for one. After about a minute's scramble, they stopped to listen and knew by the noises they heard that they were being followed. If only the door was open again, said Scrub as he went on, and Jill nodded. For at the top of the shrubbery was a high stone wall, and in that wall was a door by which you could get out to the open moor. This door was nearly always locked, but there had been times when people had found it open, or perhaps there had only been one time. But you might imagine how the memory of even one time kept people hoping and trying the door, for if it should happen to be unlocked, it would be a splendid way of getting outside the school grounds without being seen. Jill and Eustace, now both very hot and very grubby from going along bent almost double under the laurels, panted up to the wall, and there was the door, shut as usual. I'm sure it's to be no good, said Eustace, with his hand on the handle, and then, oh, by gum! For the handle turned and the door opened. A moment before, both of them had meant to go through that doorway in double quick time, if by any chance the door was not locked. Meant to get through that door. But, the, but when the door actually opened, they both stood stock still, for what they saw was quite the opposite from what they had expected. They'd expected to see the grey, heathery slope of the moor going up and up to join the dull autumn sky. Instead, a blaze of sunshine met them. It poured through the doorway as the light of a June day pours into a garage when you open the door. It made the drops of water on the grass glitter like beads and showed up the dirtiness of Jill's tear-stained face. And the sunlight was coming from what certainly did look like a different world. What they could see of it. They saw smooth turf, smoother and brighter than Jill had ever seen before, and blue sky, and darting to and fro, things so bright that they might have been jewels or huge butterflies. Although she had been longing for something like this, Jill felt frightened. She looked at Scrub's face and saw that he was frightened too. Come on, Paul, he said in a breathless voice. Can we get back? Is it safe? Asked Jill. That moment, a voice shouted from behind, a mean, spiteful little voice. Now then, Paul, it squeaked. Everyone knows you're there. Down you come. It was the voice of Edith Jekyll, one of them herself. Not one of them herself, but one of their hangers-on and the talebearers. Quick, said Scrub. Here, hold hands. We mustn't get separated. And before she quite knew what was happening, he had grabbed her hand and pulled her through the door, out of the school grounds, out of England, and out of our world into that place. The sound of Edith Jekyll's voice stopped as suddenly as the voice on the radio when it is switched off. Instantly, there was a quite different sound all around them. It came from those bright things overhead, which now turned out to be birds. They were making a righteous noise, but it was much more like music, rather advanced music when you didn't quite take in the first hearing than bird songs ever are in our world. Yet in spite of the singing, there was a sort of background of immense silence. That silence, combined with the freshness of the air, made Jill think they might be on the top of a very high mountain. Scrub still had her by the hand, and they were walking forwards, staring about them on every side. Jill saw that huge trees, rather like cedars, but bigger, grew in every direction. But as they did not grow close together, and as there were no undergrowth, this did not prevent one from seeing a long way into the forest to left and right. As far as Jill's eyes could reach, it was all the same: leveled turf, darting birds with yellow or dragonfly blue, or rainbow plumage, blue shadows, and emptiness. There was not a breath of wind in that cool, bright air. It was a very lonely forest. Right ahead, there were no trees, only blue sky. They went straight on without speaking, till suddenly Jill heard Scrub say, "Look out!" and felt herself jerked back. They were at the very edge of a cliff. Jill was one of those lucky people who had good head for heights. She didn't mind in the least standing on the edge of a precipice. She was rather annoyed with Scrub for pulling her back. Just as if I were a kid, she said as she wrenched her hand out of his. When she saw how very white he had turned, she despised him. What's the matter? She said, and to show that she was not afraid, she stood very near the edge indeed. In fact, a good deal nearer than ever she liked. Then she looked down. She now realized that Scrub had some excuse for looking white. For no cliff in our world is to be compared with this. Imagine yourself at the top of the very highest cliff you know, and imagine yourself looking down to the very bottom. And then imagine that the precipice goes on below that, as far again, 10 times as far, 20 times as far. And when you've looked down all that distance, imagine little white things that might at first be at glance be mistaken for sheep. Presently, you realize they are clouds. Not little wreaths of mist, but the enormous white puffy clouds, which are themselves as big as most mountains. And at last, in between those clouds, you get your first glimpse of the real bottom, so far away that you can't make out whether it's a field or wood, or land or water, farther below those clouds than you are above them. Jill stared at it. Then she thought that perhaps after all, she would step back a foot or two from the edge, but she didn't like to for fear of what Scrub would think. Then she suddenly decided that she didn't care what he thought, and that she would jolly well get away from that horrible edge and never laugh at anyone for not liking heights again. But when she tried to move, she found she couldn't. Her legs seemed to have turned into putty. Everything was swimming before her eyes. What are you doing, Paul? Come back. Blithering little idiot, shouted Scrub, but his voice seemed to be coming from a long way off. She felt him grabbing at her, but by now she had no control of her own arms and legs. There was a moment's struggle on the cliff's edge. Jill was too frightened and dizzy to know quite what she was doing, but two things she remembered as long as she lived. They often came back to her in dreams. One was that she had wrenched herself free of Scrub's clutches. The other was that at that same moment, Eustace himself, with a terrified scream, had lost his balance and gone hurtling into the depths. Fortunately, she was given no time to think over what she had done. Some huge, brightly colored animal had rushed to the edge of the cliff. It was lying down, leaning over, and, this was the odd thing, blowing. Not roaring or snoring, but just blowing from its wide opened mouth, blowing out as steadily as a vacuum cleaner sucks in. Jill was lying so close to the creature that she could feel the breath vibrating steadily through its body. She was lying still because she couldn't get up. She was nearly fainting, indeed, she wished she could really faint, but faints don't come for the asking. At last she saw, far away below her, a tiny black speck floating away from the cliffs and slightly upwards. As it rose, it also got farther away. By the time it was nearly on a level with the cliff top, it was so far off that she lost sight of it. It was obviously moving away from them at a great speed. Jill couldn't help thinking that the creature at her side was blowing it away. So she turned and looked at the creature. It was a lion. One moment. I'm trying to fix my... Whatever. Chapter 2. Jill is given a task. Without a glance at Jill, the lion rose to its feet and gave one last blow. Then, as if satisfied with its work, it turned and stalked slowly away, back into the forest. It must be a dream. It must, said Jill to herself. I'll wake up in a moment. But it wasn't, and she didn't. I do wish we'd never come to this dreadful place, said Jill. I don't believe Scrub knew any more about it than I do, or if he did, he had no business to bring me here without warning me what it was like. It's not my fault he fell over the cliff. If he'd left me alone, we should both be all right. Then she remembered again the scream that Scrub had given when he fell and burst into tears. Crying is all right in its way while it lasts, but you have to stop sooner or later, and then you still have to decide what to do. When Jill stopped, she found she was dreadfully thirsty. She had been lying face downwards, and now she sat up. The birds had ceased singing. There was perfect silence except for one small, persistent sound, which seemed to come from a good distance away. She listened carefully and felt almost sure it was the sound of running water. Jill got up, looked around her very carefully. There was no sign of the lion, but there were so many trees about that it might easily be quite close without her seeing it. For all she knew, there might be several lions. But her thirst was very bad now, and she plucked up her courage to go and look for the running water. She went on tiptoes, stealing cautiously from tree to tree, and stopping to peer around her at every step. The wood was so still that it was not difficult to decide where the sound was coming from. It grew clearer every moment, and sooner than she expected, she came to an open glade and saw the stream, bright as glass, running across the turf of a stone's throw away from her. But although the sight of the water made her feel 10 times thirstier than before, she didn't rush forwards and drink. She stood as still as she had been, as if she had been turned into stone, with her mouth wide open. And she had a very good reason. Just on this side of the stream lay the lion. It lay with its head raised and its 2 forepaws out in front of it, like the lions in Trafalgar Square. She knew at once that it had seen her, for its eyes looked straight into hers for a moment and then turned away, as if it knew her quite well and didn't think much of her. I'll run away. If I run away, it'll be after me in a moment, thought Jill. And if I go on, I shall run straight into its mouth. Anyway, she couldn't have moved if she had tried, and she couldn't take her eyes off of it. How long this lasted, she could not be sure. It seemed like hours, and the thirst became so bad that she almost felt she would not mind being eaten by the lion if only she could be sure of getting a mouthful of water first. If you're thirsty, you may drink. They were the first words she had heard since Scrub had spoken to her on the edge of the cliff. For a second she stared here and there, wondering who had spoken, and then the voice said again, If you are thirsty, come and drink. And of course she remembered what Scrub had said about animals talking in that other world, and realized that it was the lion speaking. Anyway, she had seen its lips move this time, and the voice was not like a man's. It was deeper, wilder, and stronger. A sort of heavy, golden voice. It did not make her any less frightened than she had been before, but it made her frightened in a rather different way. Are you not thirsty? Said the lion. I'm dying of thirst, said Jill. Then drink, said the lion. Would you mind going away while I do, said Jill. The lion answered this only by a look and a very low growl. And as Jill gazed into its motionless bulk, she realized that she might as well have asked the whole mountain to move aside for her convenience. The delicious rippling noise of the stream was driving her nearly frantic. Will you promise not to do anything to me if I do come? Said Jill. I make no promises, said the lion. Jill was so thirsty now that without noticing it, she had come a step nearer. Do you eat girls? She said. I have swallowed up girls and boys, women and men, kings and emperors, cities and realms, said the lion. It didn't say this as if it were boasting, nor as if it were sorry, nor as if it were angry. It just said it. I daren't come and drink, said Jill. Then you will die of thirst, said the lion. Oh dear, said Jill, coming another step nearer. I suppose I must go and look for another stream then. There is no other stream, said the lion. It never occurred to Jill to disbelieve the lion. No one who has seen his stern face could do that. And her mind suddenly made itself up. It was the worst thing she had ever had to do, but she went forwards to the stream, knelt down, and began scooping up water in her hand. It was the coldest, most refreshing water she had ever tasted. You didn't need to drink much of it, for it quenched her thirst at once. Before she tasted it, she had been intending to make a dash away from the lion the moment she had finished. Now she realized that this would be on the whole the most dangerous thing of all. She got up and stood there with her lips still wet from drinking. Come here, said the lion, and she had to. She was almost between its front paws now, looking straight into its face, but she couldn't stand that for long. She dropped her eyes. Human child, said the lion, where is the boy? He fell over the cliff, said Jill, and added, Sir. She didn't know what else to call him, and it sounded cheek to call him nothing. How did he come to do that, human child? He was trying to stop me from falling, sir. Why were you so near the edge, human child? I was showing off, sir. That is a very good answer. Do so no more. And now, here for the first time, the lion's face became a little less stern. The boy is safe. I have blown him to Narnia. Your task will be the harder because of what you have done. Please, what task, sir? Said Jill. The task for which I called you and him here out of your own world. This puzzled Jill very much. It's mistaking me for someone else, she thought. She didn't dare to tell the lion this, though she felt things would get into a dreadful muddle unless she did. Speak your thought, human child, said the lion. I was wondering, could there be some mistake? Because nobody called me in Scrub, you know. It was we who asked someone here. Scrub said that we were to call to somebody. It was a name I wouldn't know, and perhaps the somebody would let us in. And we did, and then we found the door open. You would not have been called to me unless I had been calling to you, said the lion. Then you are somebody, sir, said Jill. I am. And now hear your task. Far from here, in the land of Narnia, there lives an aged king who is sad because he has no prince of his blood to be king after him. He has no heir because his only son was stolen from him many years ago, and no one in Narnia knows where that prince went or whether he is still alive. But he is. I lay on you this command, that you seek the lost prince until either you have found him and brought him to his father's house, or else died in the attempt, or else gone back into your own world. How, please? Said Jill. I will tell you, child, said the lion. These are the signs by which I will guide you into your quest. First, as soon as the boy Eustace sets foot in Narnia, he will meet an old and dear friend. You must greet that friend at once. If he does, you will both have good help. Second, you must journey out of Narnia, to the north, till you come to the ruined city of the ancient giants. Third, you shall find a writing on a stone of that ruined city, and you must do what the writing tells you. Fourth, you will know the lost prince, if you find him, by this, that he will be the first prince you have met in your travels who will ask you to do something in my name, in the name of Aslan. As the lion seemed to have finished, Jill thought she should say something, so she said, Thank you very much. See, child, said Aslan in a gentler voice than he had yet used. Perhaps you do not quite see as well as you think. The first step is to remember. Repeat to me, in order, the 4 signs. Jill tried and didn't get them quite right. So the lion corrected her and made her repeat them again and again until she could say them perfectly. He was very patient over this, so that when it was done, Jill plucked up the courage to ask, "Please, tell me to get to Narnia." "On my breath," said the lion. "I will blow you to the west of the world as I blew Eustace." "Shall I catch him in time to tell him the first sign? But I suppose it won't matter. If he sees an old friend, he's sure to go and speak to him, isn't he?" "You will have no time to spare," said the lion. "That's why I must send you at once. Come, walk before me to the edge of the cliff." Jill remembered very well that if there was no time to spare, that it was her own fault. "If I hadn't made such a fool of myself, Scrub and I would have been going together, and he'd have heard all the instructions as well as me," she thought. So she did as she was told. It was very alarming walking back to the edge of the cliff, especially as the lion did not walk with her, but behind her, making no noise on his soft paws. But long before she had got anywhere near the edge, the voice behind her said, "Stand still. In a moment I will blow. But first remember, remember the signs. Say them to yourself when you wake in the morning, and when you lay down at night, and when you wake in the middle of the night, and whatever strange things might happen to you, let nothing turn your mind from following the signs. And secondly, give you a warning. Here on this mountain I have spoken to you clearly. I will not often do so down in Narnia. Here on the mountain, the air is clear and your mind is clear. As you drop into Narnia, the air will thicken. Take great care that it does not confuse your mind, and the signs which you have learned here will not look at all as you expect them to look when you meet them there. That is why it is so important to know them by heart and pay no attention to appearances. Remember the signs and believe the signs. Nothing else will matter. Now, daughter of Eve, farewell." The voice had been growing softer towards the end of the speech, and now it faded away altogether. Jill looked behind her. To her astonishment, she saw the cliff already more than 100 yards behind her, and the lion himself a speck of bright gold on the edge of it. She had been setting her teeth and clenching her fists for a terrible blast of lion's breath, but the breath had really been so gentle that she had not even noticed the moment at which she left the earth, and now there was nothing but air for thousands upon thousands of feet below her. Second, really struggling with this. There we go. I think I can see chat now. I'm gonna try something. Hero. I'm testing something. Okay. I wanted to be able to see chat on my phone, but it wasn't working, and I think I can see it now. I haven't missed any messages, have I? Oh, cool. Resuming. She felt frightened only for a second. For one thing, the world beneath her was so very far away that it seemed to have nothing to do with her. For another, floating on the breath of the lion was so extremely comfortable. She found she could lie on her back, or on her face, and twist any way she pleased, just as you can in water, if you've learned to float really well. And because she was moving at the same pace as the breath, there was no wind, and the air seemed beautifully warm. It was not in the least like being in an aeroplane, because there was no noise and no vibration. If Jill had ever been in a balloon, she might have thought it more like that, only better. When she looked back now, she could take in for the first time the real size of the mountain she was leaving. She wondered why a mountain so huge as that was not covered with snow and ice. But I suppose all that sort of thing is different in this world, thought Jill. Then she looked below her. She was so high that she couldn't make out whether she was floating over land or sea, nor what speed she was going at. "By Jove, the signs," said Jill suddenly. "I'd better repeat them." She was in a panic for a second or two, but she found she could still say them all correctly. "So that's all right," she said, and lay back on the air as if it was a sofa, with a sigh of contentment. "Well, I do declare," said Jill to herself after some hours. "I've been asleep. Fancy sleeping on air. I wonder if anyone's done it before. I don't suppose they have. Oh, bother, Scrubs probably has. On this same journey, a little bit before me. Let's see what it looks like down below." What it looked like was an enormous, very dark blue plain. There were no hills to be seen, but there were biggish white things moving slowly across it. Those must be clouds, she thought, but far bigger than the ones we saw from the cliff. I suppose they're bigger because they're nearer. I must be getting lower, all through this sun. The sun, which had been high overhead when she began her journey, was now getting in her eyes. This meant that it was getting lower, ahead of her. Scrub was right in saying that Jill, I don't know about girls in general, don't think much about points of the compass. Otherwise, she would have known, when the sun began getting her eyes, that she was traveling pretty nearly due west. Staring at the blue plain below her, she presently noticed that there were little dots of brighter pale color here and there. It's the sea, thought Jill. I do believe those are islands. And so they were. She might have felt rather jealous if she had known that some of them were islands which Scrub had seen from his ship's deck and even landed on, but she didn't know this. Then later on, she began to see that there were little wrinkles on the blue flatness, little wrinkles which must be quite big ocean waves if you were down among them. And now, all along the horizon, there was a thick, dark line which grew thicker and darker so quickly that she could see it growing. That was the first sign that she had of the great speed at which she was traveling, and she knew that the thickening line must be land. Suddenly, from her left, for the wind was in the south, a great white cloud came rushing towards her, this time on the same level as herself, and before she knew where she was going, she had shot right into the middle of its cold, wet fogginess. That took her breath away, but she was in it only for a moment. She came out blinking in the sunlight and found her clothes wet. She had on a blazer and sweater, and shorts and stockings, and pretty thick shoes. It had been a muddy sort of day in England. She came out lower than she had gone in, and as soon as she did, she noticed something which, I suppose, she ought to have been expecting, but which came as a surprise and a shock. It was noises. Up till then, she had traveled in total silence. Now, for the first time, she heard the noises of the waves and the crying of seagulls, and now, too, she smelled the smell of the sea. There was no mistake about her speed now. She saw two waves meet with a smack, and a spout of foam got up between them. She had hardly seen it before it was 100 yards behind her. The land was getting nearer at a great pace. She could see mountains far inland, and other nearer mountains on her left. She could see bays and headlands, woods and fields, stretches of sandy beach. The sound of waves breaking on the shore was growing louder every second and drowning out the other sea noises. Suddenly, the land opened right ahead of her. She was coming to the mouth of a river. It was very low now, only a few feet above the water. A wave top came against her toe, and a great splash of foam spurted up, drenching her nearly to the waist. Now she was losing speed. Instead of being carried up the river, she was gliding into the riverbank on her left. There were so many things to notice that she could hardly take them all in. A smooth green lawn, a ship so brightly colored that it looked like an enormous piece of jewelry, towers and battlements, banners fluttering in the air, crowd, gay clothes, armor, gold, swords. Excuse me. A sound of music. This was all jumbled. The first thing that she knew clearly was that she had alighted and was standing under a thicket of trees close by the riverside. There, only a few feet away from her, was Scrub. At first, she thought of how very grubby and untidy and generally unimpressive he looked. And the second was, how wet am I? Chapter 3. The Sailing of the King. What made Scrub look so dingy, and Jill too, if she could only see herself, was the splendor of their surroundings. I had better describe them at once. Through a cleft in those mountains which Jill had seen far inland as she approached the land, the sunset light was pouring over a level lawn. On the far side of the lawn, its weather vanes glittering in the light, rose a many-towered and many-turreted castle, the most beautiful castle Jill had ever seen. On the far side was a quay of white marble, and moored to this, the ship, a tall ship with high forecastle and high poop, gilded in crimson, with a great flag at the masthead, and many banners waving from the decks, and a row of shields, bright as silver, along the bulwarks. The gangplank was laid to her, and at the foot of it, just ready to go on board, stood an old man. He wore a rich mantle of scarlet, which opened in front to show his silver mail shirt. There was a thin circlet of gold on his head. His beard, white as wool, fell nearly to his waist. He stood straight enough, leaning one hand on the shoulder of a richly dressed lord who seemed younger than himself, but you could see he was very old and frail. He looked as if a puff of wind could blow him away, and his eyes were watery. Immediately in front of the king, who had turned round to speak to his people before going on board the ship, there was a little chair on wheels, and harnessed to it a little donkey, not much bigger than a big retriever. In this chair sat a fat little dwarf. He was as richly dressed as the king, but because of his fatness and because he was sitting hunched up among cushions, the effect was quite different. It made him look like a shapeless little bundle of fur and silk and velvet. He was as old as the king, but more hale and hearty, with very keen eyes. His bare head, which was bald and extremely large, shone like a gigantic billiard ball in the sunset light. Further back, in a half circle, stood what Jill at once knew to be the courtiers, whatever. They were well worth looking at for their clothes and armor alone. As far as they went, they looked more like a flower bed than a crowd. But what really made Jill open her eyes and mouth as wide as they would go was the people themselves, if people was the right word. For only 1 in every 5 was human. The rest were things you never see in our world: fauns, satyrs, centaurs. Jill could give names to these, for she had seen pictures of them. Dwarfs, too. And there were a lot of animals she knew as well: boars, badgers, moles, leopards, mice, and various birds. But then they were so very different from the animals which one called by the same names in England. Some of them were much bigger. The mice, for instance, stood on their hind legs and were over 2 feet high, but quite apart from that, they all looked different. You could see by the expressions in their faces that they could talk and think just as well as you could. Golly, thought Jill, so it's really true after all. But next moment she added, I wonder, are they friendly? For she had just noticed on the outskirts of the crowd 1 or 2 giants and some people whom she couldn't give a name at all. At that moment, Aslan and the signs rushed back into her mind. She had forgotten all about them for the last half hour. Scrub, she whispered, grabbing his arm. Scrub, quick. Do you see anyone you know? So you've turned up again, have you? Said Scrub disagreeably, for which she had some reason. Well, keep quiet, can't you? I want to listen. Don't be a fool, said Jill. There isn't a moment to lose. Don't you see some old friend here? Because you've got to go speak to him at once. What are you talking about? Said Scrub. It's Aslan, the lion. Says you've got to, said Jill despairingly. I've seen him. Oh, you have you? What did he say? He said the very first person you saw in Narnia would be an old friend, and you've got to speak to him at once. Well, there's nobody here I've seen in my life before, and anyway, I don't know whether this is Narnia. I thought you said you'd been here before, said Jill. Well, you thought wrong then. Well, I like that. You told me. For heaven's sake, dry up and let's hear what they're saying. The king was speaking to the dwarf, but Jill couldn't hear what he said, and as far as she could make out, the dwarf made no answer, though he nodded and wagged his head a great deal. Then the king raised his voice and addressed the whole court, but his voice was so old and cracked that she could understand very little of his speech, especially since it was all about people and places she'd never heard of. When the speech was over, the king stooped down and kissed the dwarf on both cheeks, straightened himself, raised his hand as if in blessing, and went, slowly and with feeble steps, up the gangway and on board the ship. The courtiers appeared to be greatly moved by his departure. Handkerchiefs were got out, sounds of sobbing were heard in every direction, the gangway was cast off, trumpets sounded from the poop, and the ship moved away from the quay. It was being towed by a rowing boat, but Jill didn't see that. Now, said Scrub, but he didn't get any further, because at that moment a large white object, Jill thought for a second that it was a kite, came gliding through the air and alighted at his feet. It was a white owl, but so big it stood as high as a good-sized dwarf. It blinked and peered as if it were short-sighted, and put its head a little to one side, and said in a soft, hooting kind of voice, To who, who are you two? My name's Scrub, and this is Pole, said Eustace. Would you mind telling us where we are? In the land of Narnia, at the king's castle of Cair Paravel. Is that the king who'd just taken ship? Too true, said the owl sadly, shaking his head. But who are you? There's something magic about you two. I saw you arrive. You flew. Everyone else was so busy seeing the king off that nobody knew, except me. I happened to notice you. You flew. We were sent here by Aslan, said Eustace in a low voice. To who, said the owl, ruffling its feathers. This is almost too much for me. So early in the evening. I'm not quite myself till the sun's down. And we've been sent to find the lost prince, said Jill, who has been anxiously waiting to get into the conversation. It's the first I've heard about it, said Eustace. What prince? You had better come and speak to the Lord Regent at once, it said. That's him over there in the donkey carriage, Trumpkin the dwarf. The bird turned and began leading the way, muttering to itself, Who, to who? What to do? I can't think quite clearly yet. It's too early. What is the king's name? Said Eustace. Caspian the 10th, said the owl, and Jill wondered why Scrub had suddenly pulled up short in his walk and turned an extraordinary color. She She thought she had never seen him look so sick about anything. But before she had time to ask any questions, they had reached the dwarf. I'm sorry, my heart hurts right now. He had a chance to see Caspian before he left, and he missed that chance. And that is sad. I'm sorry. Just gathering up the reins of his donkey and prepared to drive back to the castle. The crowd of courtiers had broken up and were going in the same direction, by ones, twos, and little knots, like people coming away from watching a game or a race. To who, Lord Regent, said the owl, stooping down a little and holding its beak near the dwarf's ear. Eh, what's that? Said the dwarf. Two strangers, my lord, said the owl. Rangers? What do you mean? Said the dwarf. I see two uncommonly grubby man-clubs. What do you want? What do they want? My name's Jill, said Jill, pressing forwards. She was very eager to explain the important business on which they had come. The girl's called Jill, said the owl as loud as it could. What's that? Said the dwarf. The girls are all killed. I don't believe a word of it. What girls? Who killed them? Only one girl, my lord, said the owl. Her name is Jill. Speak up, said the dwarf. Don't stand there buzzing and twittering in my ear. Who's been killed? Nobody's been killed, hooted the owl. Who? Nobody! All right, you needn't shout. I'm not so deaf as all that. What do you mean by coming here and telling me nobody's been killed? Why should anyone have been killed? Better tell him I'm Eustace, said Scrub. The boy's Eustace, my lord, hooted the owl as loud as it could. Useless, said the dwarf irritably. I dare say. I'm sorry. Useless, said the dwarf irritably. I dare say he is. Is that any reason for bringing him to court? Hey, not useless, said the owl. Eustace! Used to it? Is he? Fuck's sakes. I'm sorry, I'm trying so hard to get through this, but I'm giggling at the stupid name. Used to it, is he? I don't know what you're talking about, I'm sure. I tell you what he is, Master Glimfeather. When I was a young dwarf, there were to be talking beasts and birds in my country who could really talk. There weren't any of this mumbling and muttering and whispering. It would have been tolerated for a moment. Not for a moment, sir. It wouldn't have been tolerated. You, Ernest, my trumpet, please. A little fawn who had been standing quietly beside the dwarf's elbow all this time now handed him a silver ear trumpet. It was made like the musical instrument called a serpent, so that the tube curled right around the dwarf's neck. While he was getting it settled, the owl Glimfeather suddenly said to the children in a whisper, My brain's a bit clearer now. Don't say anything about the lost prince. I'll explain later. It wouldn't do. It wouldn't do. To who or what a to do? Now, said the dwarf, if you have anything sensible to say, Master Glimfeather, try it and say it. Take a deep breath and don't attempt to speak too quickly. With help from the children, and in spite of a fit of coughing on the part of the dwarf, Glimfeather explained to the that the strangers had been sent by Aslan to visit the court of Narnia. The dwarf glanced quickly up at them with a new expression in his eyes. Sent by the lion himself, hey? And he said, and from that other place beyond the world's end, eh? Yes, my lord, bawled Eustace into the trumpet. Son of Adam and daughter of Eve, hey? Said the dwarf. But people at Experiment House hadn't heard of Adam and Eve, so Jill and Eustace couldn't answer this, but the dwarf didn't seem to notice. Well, my dears, he said, taking first one and then the other by the hand, and bowing his head a little, you are very heartily welcome. If the good king, my poor master, had not this very hour set sail for 7 Isles, he would have been glad of your coming. It would have brought back his youth to him for a moment. And now, it is high time for supper. You shall tell me your business in full council tomorrow morning. Master Glimfeather, see that bedchambers and suitable clothes and all else are provided for these guests in the most honorable fashion. And Glimfeather, in your ear. Here the dwarf put his mouth close to the owl's head and, no doubt, intended to whisper, but, like other deaf people, he wasn't a very good judge of his own voice, and both children heard him say, See that they're properly washed. After that, the dwarf touched up his donkey and set it off towards the castle at something between a trot and a waddle. It was a very fat little beast. while the fawn, the owl, and the children followed at a rather slower pace. The sun had set, and the air was growing cool. They went across the lawn, and then through an orchard, and so to the north gate of Cair Paravel, which stood wide open. Inside, they found a grassy courtyard. Lights were already showing from the windows of the great hall on the right, and from a more complicated mass of buildings straight ahead. Into these, the owl. I'm sorry, I really like the fact that even though Cair Paravel had fallen into ruins during the era, I guess, of. We called the age or era, whatever. The age of Caspian, he rebuilt it. And that's, I think, kind of neat. Um, uh, duh, duh, duh. Inside they found the grassy courtyard, massive buildings. Inside these, the owl led them. And there a most delighted person came out to look after Jill. She was not so much taller than Jill herself, and a good deal slenderer, but obviously full grown, graceful as a willow, and her hair was willowy too, and there seemed to be moss in it. She brought Jill to a round room in one of the turrets, where there was a little bath sink in the floor, and a fire of sweet-smelling woods burning on the flat hearth, and a lamp hanging by a silver chain from the vaulted roof. The window looked west into the strange land of Narnia, and Jill saw the red remains of the sunset still glowing behind distant mountains. It made her long for more adventures and feel sure that this was only the beginning. When she had had her bath and brushed her hair and put on the clothes that had been laid out for her, they were the kind not only felt nice but looked nice and smelt nice and made nice sounds when you moved as well. She would have gone back to gaze out of that exciting window, but she was interrupted by a bang on the door. "Come in," said Jill, and in came Scrub, also bathed and splendidly dressed in Narnia clothes, but his face didn't look as if he were enjoying it. "Oh, here you are at last," he said crossly, flinging himself into a chair. "I've been trying to find you for ever so long." "Well, now you have," said Jill. "I say, Scrub, isn't it all simply so exciting and scrumptious for words?" She had forgotten all about the signs and the lost prince for the moment. "Oh, that's what you think it is," said Scrub. And then, after a pause, "I wish to goodness we'd never come." "Why on earth?" "I can't bear it," said Scrub. "Seeing the king, Caspian, a doddering old man like that, it's frightful." "Why, what harm does it do you?" "Oh, you don't understand. Now that I come to think of it, you couldn't. I didn't tell you what this world was, a different time from ours." "How do you mean?" "The time you spent here doesn't take up any time in our time. Do you see? I mean, however long we spend here, we shall get back to the experiment house at the moment we left it." "That won't be much fun." "Oh, dry up, don't keep interrupting. And when you're back in England, in our world, you can't tell how time's going here. It might be any number of years in Narnia, while you're having 1 year at home. Pevensy's explained it all to me, but like a fool, I forgot about it. And now, apparently, it's been about 70 years, Narnian years, since I was here last. Do you see now? And I came back and find Caspian an old man." "Then the king was an old friend of yours," said Jill. A horrid thought had struck her. "I should jolly well think he was," said Scrum miserably. "About as good a friend as a chap could have. And last time he was only a few years older than me. And to see that old man with a white beard, and to remember Caspian as he was the morning we captured the Lone Islands, or in the fight with the sea serpent, oh, it's frightful. It's worse than coming back and finding him dead." "Oh, shut up," said Jill impatiently. "It's far worse than you think. We've muffed the first sign." Of course, Scrub did not understand this. Then Jill told him about her conversation with Aslan, and the 4 signs, and the task of finding the lost prince which had been laid upon them. "So you see," she wound up, "you did see an old friend, just as Aslan said, and you ought to have gone up and spoken to him at once, and now you haven't, and everything's going wrong from the very beginning." "But how was I to know?" said Scrub. "If only you'd listened to me when I tried to tell you, we'd be all right," said Jill. "Yes, and if you hadn't played the fool on the edge of that cliff and jolly well nearly murdered me— all right, I say murder, and I'll say it again as often as I like, so keep your hair on. We'd have come together and both known what to do." "I suppose he was the very first person you saw," said Jill. "You must have been here hours before me. Are you sure you didn't see anyone else first?" "I was only here about a minute before you," said Scrub. "He must have blown you quicker than me, making up for lost time, the time you lost." "Don't be a perfect beast, Scrub," said Jill. "Hello, what's that?" It was the castle bell ringing for supper, and thus what looked like turning into a first-rate quarrel was happily cut short. Both had a good appetite by this time. Supper in the great hall of the castle was the most splendid thing either of them had ever seen. For though Eustace had been in the world before, he had never spent his whole visit at sea. He had spent his whole visit at sea and knew nothing of the glory and courtesy of the Narnians at home in their own land. Banners hung from the roof, and each course came in with trumpets and kettle drums. There were soups that would make your mouth water to think of, and the lovely fishes called pavenders, and venison and peacock and pies, and ices and jellies and fruit and nuts, and all manner of wines and fruit drinks. Even Eustace cheered up and admitted that it was something like. And when all the serious eating and drinking was over, a blind poet came forwards and struck up the grand old tale of Prince Cor and Aravis and the House of Bree, which is called The Horse and His Boy, and tells of an adventure that happened in Narnia and Calormen and the lands between, in the golden age when Peter was High King in Cair Paravel. I haven't time to tell it now, though. It is well worth hearing. Damn, the nostalgia hits hard, and we're all reading this book now. When they were dragging themselves upwards to bed, yawning their heads off, Jill said, "I bet we sleep well tonight," for it had been a full day, which just shows how little anyone knows what is going to happen to them next. Chapter 4. Hey, love. How are the ads looking? Are they starting right now? So that was a perfect pause time? Oh my gosh, good thing I asked. I feel so sad. I could easily read the book again, but like the hit of like sadness and this loss and nostalgia comes real hard at this series. Because he didn't listen to her, we got to miss out on any chance of interacting with Caspian one last time. I wonder if Caspian is going back. Like they said that when Aslan was explaining, he said that the king had lost his only son, and that he was too old to have another heir. And that makes because Caspian had married that, I guess, princess, the daughter of the star. I guess she might have been a star. I do wonder if she also aged backwards like her father did. Does that mean that she returned to being a star, or did she grow old with Caspian and died? Either way, it's pretty obvious she did not return with him on the boat. And I do wonder why he's going towards the Seven Isles. Is he going to try to sail all the way back to the west? It kind of makes sense, I guess. That was quite a grand adventure because as a kid, he was raised to not believe in any magic or in talking animals and stuff, or anything like dwarves or satyrs and stuff. And in his youth, he helped return that to Narnia. So he grew up excited to go on adventures, and he got to go on an adventure over the seas and see all those magical things. He got to see dragons and mer people and all that. And then he probably returned to Narnia and spent his ages remembering those times. Because, I mean, that's, I guess, is also, you could say, where he met his wife, so. And he lost his friend Reepicheep. Yeah. Poor old man. So what are you doing, hero? For the... What are you doing again tomorrow? You were saying... Marathon from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. playing games. Playing games. All this week from Monday to Friday? Oh, yeah, right, it's Sunday. Duh. Hmm. Do you have any idea what you're gonna start with tomorrow? Not quite, not quite. Trying to figure out what games have the most interaction? Busy, busy hero. That's fair. Somehow it simultaneously feels like it's been February forever, but also it's hard to believe that we're nearly at the end of February. Oh, sounding out. So, Chapter 4 Parliament of Owls. It is a very funny thing that the sleepier you are, the longer you take about getting to bed, especially if you are lucky enough to have a fire in your room. Jill felt she couldn't even start undressing unless she sat down in front of the fire for a bit first. And once she had sat down, she didn't want to get up again. She had already said to herself about 5 times, "I must go to bed," when she was startled by a tap on the window. She got up, pulled the curtain, and at first she saw nothing but darkness. Then she jumped and started backwards. Something very large had dashed itself against the window, giving a sharp tap on the glass as it did so. A very unpleasant idea came into her head. Suppose they have giant moths in this country. Ugh! But then the thing came back, and this time she was almost sure she saw a beak. And then the beak had made the tapping noise. Hmm? Hmm. Tapping. I lost my place. There, tapping noise. It's some huge bird, thought Jill. Could it be an eagle? She didn't very much want to visit. She didn't very much want a visit, even from an eagle. She opened the window and looked out. Instantly, with a great whirling noise, the creature alighted on the windowsill and stood there, filling up the whole window, so that Jill had to step back to make room for it. It was the owl. "Hush, hush! To who?" said the owl. "Don't make a noise. Now, that's not creepy. Now, are you two really in earnest about what you've got to do?" "About the lost prince, you mean?" said Jill. "Yes, we've got to be." For now she remembered the lion's voice and face, which she had nearly forgotten during the feastings and storytellings in the hall. "Good," said the owl. "Then there's no time to waste. You must get away from here at once. I'll go and wake the other human. Then I'll come back for you. You better change those court clothes and put on something you can travel in. I'll be back in 2 twos. To-hoo!" And without warning, waiting for an answer, he was gone. If Jill had been more used to adventures, she might have doubted the owl's word, but this never occurred to her. In the exciting idea of a midnight escape, she forgot her sleepiness. She changed back into sweater and shorts. There was a guide's knife on the belt of the shorts, which might come in useful, and added a few of the things that had been left in the room for her by the girl with the willowy hair. She chose a short cloak that came down to her knees and a hood, just the thing if it rains, she thought, a few handkerchiefs and a comb. Then she sat down and waited. She was getting sleepy again when the owl returned. "Now we're ready," it said. "You'd better lead the way," said Jill. "I don't know all the passages yet." "Joo-hoo," said the owl. "We're not going through the castle. That would never do. You must ride on me. We shall fly." "Oh," said Jill, and stood with her mouth open, not much liking the idea. Shan't I be far too heavy for you?" To-hoo. Don't be a fool. I've already carried the other one. Now, but we'll put out that lamp first." As soon as the lamp was out, the bit of the night which you saw through the window looked less dark, no longer black, but gray. The owl stood on the windowsill with his back to the room and raised his wings. Jill had to climb up to his short, fat body and get her knees under the wings and grip tight. The feathers felt beautifully warm and soft, but there was nothing to hold on by. "I wonder how Scrub liked his ride," thought Jill. And just as soon as she was thinking this, with a horrid plunge, they had left the windowsill, and the wings were making a flurry around her ears, and the night air, rather cool and damp, was flying in her face. It was much lighter than she'd expected, and though the sky was overcast, one patch of watery silver showed where the moon was hiding above the clouds. The fields beneath her looked gray, and the trees black. There was a certain amount of wind, a hushing, ruffling sort of wind, which meant that rain was coming soon. The owl wheeled round so that the castle was now ahead of them. Very few of the windows showed lights. They flew right over it, northwards, crossing the river. The air grew colder, and Jill thought she could see the white reflection of the owl in the water beneath her. But soon they were on the north bank of the river, flying above wooded country. The owl snapped at something which Jill couldn't see. "Oh, don't please," said Jill. "Don't jerk like that. You nearly threw me off." "I beg your pardon," said the owl. "I was just nabbing a bat. There's nothing so sustaining in a small way as a nice plump little bat. Shall I catch you one?" "No, thanks," said Jill with a shudder. He was flying a little lower now, and a large, black-looking object was looming up towards them. Jill had just time to see that it was a tower, a partially ruinous tower, with a lot of ivy on it, she thought, when she found herself ducking to avoid the archway of a windowsill as the owl squeezed with her through the ivied and cobwebby opening out of the fresh, grey night into a dark place inside the top of the tower. It was rather fusty inside, and the moment she stepped off the owl's back, she knew, as one usually does somehow, that it was quite crowded. And when voices began saying out of the darkness from every direction, "Too-hoo, too-hoo," she knew it was crowded with owls. She was rather relieved when a very different voice said, "Is that you, Pole?" "Is that you, Scrub?" said Jill. "Now," said Grimfeather, "I think we're all here. Let us hold a parliament of owls." "Too-hoo, too-hoo, true for you. That's the right thing to do," said several voices. "Half a moment," said Scrub's voice. "There's something I want to say first." Do, said the owls, and Jill said, "Fire ahead." "I suppose you all you chaps, owls I mean," said Scrub. "I suppose you all know that King Caspian X, in his young days, sailed to the eastern end of the world. Well, I was with him on that journey, with him and Reepicheep the mouse, and Lord Drinian, and all of them. I know it sounds hard to believe, but people don't grow older in our world at the same speed as they do in yours. And what I want to say is that I'm the king's man, and if this Parliament of Owls is any sort of plot against the king, I'm having nothing to do with it." To who, are all the king's owls too," said the owls. "What's it all about then?" said Scrub. "It's only this," said Grimfeather, "that if the Lord Regent, the dwarf Trumpkin, hears you are going to look for the lost prince, he won't let you start. He'll keep you under lock and key sooner." "Great Scott," said Scrub. "You don't mean Trumpkin's a traitor? I used to hear a lot about him in the old days at sea. Caspian, the king, I mean, trusted him absolutely." "Oh, no," said a voice. "Trumpkin's no traitor. But more than 30 champions, knights, centaurs, good giants and all sorts, have at one time or another set out to look for the lost prince, and none of them have ever come back. And at last, the king said he was not going to have all of the bravest Narnians destroyed in the search for his son, and now nobody is allowed to go." "But surely he'd let us go," said Scrub, "when he knew who I was and who had sent me." Sent both of us," put in Chill. "Yes," said Grimfeather, "I think very likely he would. But the king's away, and Trumpkin will stick to the rules. He's as true as steel. Ah." If he'd spoken to the king at first, the king would have allowed Trumpkin to assist them. So now they have to go without help. Darn. "He's as true as steel, but he's deaf as a post and very peppery. You could never make him see that this might be the time for making an exception to the rule." Um, "You might think he'd take some notice of us because we're owls, and everyone knows how wise owls are," said someone else. "But he's so old. Now he'd only say, 'You're a mere chick. I remember you when you were an egg. Don't come trying to teach me, sir. Crabs and crumpets.'" This owl imitated Trumpkin's voice. "Crabs and crumpets." Trumpkin's voice rather well, and there were sounds of owlish laughter all around. The children began to see that the Narnians all felt about Trumpkin as people feel at school about some crusty teacher, whom everyone is a little afraid of, and everyone makes fun of, and nobody really dislikes. "How long is the king going to be away?" asked Scrub. If only we knew, said Glimfeather. You see, there has been a rumor lately that Aslan himself has been seen in the islands, in Terabithia, I think it was. And the king said he would make one more attempt before he died to see Aslan's face to face again, and ask his advice about who is to be king after him. But we're all afraid that if he doesn't meet Aslan in Terabithia, he'll go on east to Seven Isles and the Lone Islands, and on and on. He never talks about it, but we all know he has never forgotten that voyage to the world's end. I'm sure in his heart of hearts he wants to go there again. Then there's no good waiting for him to come back, said Jill. No, no good, said the owl. Oh, what to do? If only you two had known and spoken to him at once, he'd have arranged everything, probably given you an army to go with you in search of the prince. Jill kept quiet at this, and hoped Scrub would be sporting enough not to tell all the owls why this hadn't happened. He was, or very nearly. That is, he only muttered under his breath, "Well, it wasn't my fault," before saying out loud, "Very well. We'll have to manage without it. But there's just one thing more I want to know. If this owl's parliament, as you call it, is all fair and above board and means no mischief, why does it have to be so jolly secret, meeting in a ruin in the dead of night and all that? To who? Hooted several owls. Where would we meet? When would anyone meet except at night? You see, explained Glimfeather, most of the creatures in Narnia have such unnatural habits. They do things by day, in broad blazing sunlight, when everyone ought to be asleep. And as a result, at night they're so blind and stupid that you can't get a word out of them. So we owls have got into the habit of meeting at sensible hours on our own when we want to talk about things. I see, said Scrub. Well, now, let's get on. Tell us about the lost prince. Then an old owl, not Glimfeather, related the story. About 10 years ago it appeared, when Aurelian, the son of Caspian, was a very young knight. He rode with his queen. Oh, excuse me. He rode with the queen, his mother, on a May morning in the north parts of Narnia. They had many squires and ladies with them, and all wore garlands of fresh leaves on their heads and horns at their sides. But they had no hounds with them, for they were maying, not hunting. In the warm part of the day, they came to a pleasant glade where a fountain flowed freshly out of the earth, and there they dismounted and ate and drank and were merry. After a time, the queen felt sleepy, and they spread cloaks for her on the grassy bank, and Prince Aurelian with the rest of the party went a little way from her, and their tales and laughter might not wake her. And so presently a great serpent came out of the thick woods and stung the queen in her hand. All heard her cry out and rushed towards her, and Aurelian was the first at her side. He saw the worm gliding away from her, and made after it with his sword drawn. But it was great, shining, green as poison, so that he could see it well. But it glided away into thick bushes, and he could not come at it. So he returned to his mother, and found them all busy about her. But they were busy in vain, for at the first glance of her face, Aurelian knew that no psychic of this world would do her good. As long as the life was in her, she seemed to be trying hard to tell him something, but she could not speak clearly, and whatever her message was, she died without delivering it. That's sad. It was then hardly 10 minutes since that they had heard her cry. They carried the queen dead back to Cair Paravel, and she was bitterly mourned by Aurelian and by the king, and by all Narnia. She had been a great lady, wise and gracious and happy, King Caspian's bride, whom he had brought home from the eastern end of the world, and men said that the blood of the stars flowed in her veins. The prince took his mother's death very hardly, as well as he might. After that, he was always riding on the northern marshes of Narnia, hunting for the venomous worm, to kill it and be avenged. No one remarked much on this, though the prince came home from these wanderings looking tired and distraught. But after a month after the queen's death, some say they could see a change in him. There was a look in his eyes of a man who has seen visions, and though he would be out all day, his horse did not bear the signs of hard riding. His chief friend among the older courtiers was Lord Drinian, he who had been his father's captain on the great voyage to the east parts of the earth. One evening, Drinian said to the prince, "Your Highness must soon give over sinking the worm. There is no true vengeance on a witless brute, as there might be on a man. You weary yourself in vain." The prince answered him, "My lord, I have almost forgotten the worm this 7 days." Drinian asked him why, if that were so. he rode so continuously in the northern woods. My lord, said the prince, I have seen there the most beautiful thing that was ever made. Fair prince, said Drinian, of your courtesy let me ride with you tomorrow, that I may also see this fair thing. With a good will, said Rillian. Then, in good time on the next day, they saddled their horses and rode a great gallop into the northern woods and alighted at the same fountain where the queen got her death. Drinian thought it strange that the prince should choose that place of all places to linger in. And there they rested till it came to high noon, and at noon Drinian looked up and saw the most beautiful lady he had ever seen, and she stood at the north side of the fountain, and said no word, but beckoned to the prince with her hand as if she bade him come to her. I'm gonna get some water. And she was tall and great, shining and wrapped in a thin garment as green as poison. And the prince stared at her like a man out of his wits. But suddenly the lady was gone. Drinian knew not where, and the two returned to Cair Paravel. It struck Drinian's mind that the shining green woman was evil. Drinian doubted very much whether he ought not to tell the adventure to the king, but he had very little wish to blab and a talebearer, and so be a blab and a talebearer, and so he held his tongue. But afterwards he wished he had spoken, for the next day Prince Rillian rode out alone. That night he came not back. From that hour no trace of him was ever found in Narnia, nor any neighboring land, and neither his horse, nor his hat, nor his cloak, nor anything else was ever found. Then Drinian, in the bitterness of his heart, went to Caspian and said, Lord King, slay me speedily, as a great traitor, for by my silence I have destroyed your son. And he told him the story. Then Caspian caught up a battle-axe and rushed up upon Lord Drinian to kill him, and Drinian stood still as stock for the death blow. But when the axe was raised, Caspian suddenly threw it away and cried out, I have lost my queen and my son. Shall I lose my friend also? And he fell upon the Lord Drinian's neck and embraced him, and both wept, and their friendship was not broken. Such was the story of Rillian. And when it was over, Jill said, I bet that serpent and that woman were the same person. True, true, we think the same as you, hooted the owls. But we don't think she killed the prince, said Glimfeather, because no bones. We know she didn't, said Scrub. Aslan told Pole he was still alive somewhere. That almost makes it worse, said the oldest owl. It means she has some use for him, and some deep scheme against Narnia. Long, long ago, at the very beginning, a white witch came out of the north and bound our land in snow and ice for 100 years, and we think that may be one of the same crew. Very well then, said Scrub. Pole and I have got to find this prince. Can you help us? Have you any clue, you two? Asked Glimfeather. Yes, said Scrub. We know we've got to go north, and we know we've got to reach the ruins of a giant city. At this, there was a greater to-hooing than ever, the noises of birds shifting their feet and ruffling their feathers, and then all the owls started speaking at once. They all explained how very sorry they were that they themselves could not go with the children on their search for the lost prince. You'd want to travel by day, and we'd want to travel by night, they said. It wouldn't do. One or two owls added here that even here, in the ruined tower, it wasn't nearly so dark as it had been when they began, and the parliament had been going on for quite long enough. In fact, the mere mention of a journey to the ruined city of giants seemed to have dampened the spirits of those birds. But Glimfeather said, if they want to go that way into Edgin's Moor, we must take them to one of the marsh wiggles. They're the only people who can help them much. True, do, said the owls. Come on, then, said Glimfeather. I'll take one, who'll take the other. It must be done tonight. I will, as far as the marsh wiggles, said another owl. Are you ready? Said Glimfeather to Jill. I think Pole's asleep, said Scrub. Chapter 5. Puddleglum. Jill was asleep. Ever since the Owls' Parliament began, she had been yawning terribly, and now she had dropped off. She was not at all pleased at being waked again, and finding herself lying on bare boards in a dusty belfry sort of place, completely dark and almost completely full of owls. She was even less pleased when she heard that they had to set off for somewhere else, and not, apparently, for bed on the owl's back. "Oh, come on, Pole, buck up," said Scrub's voice. "After all, it is an adventure." "I'm sick of adventures," said Jill crossly. She did, however, consent to climb onto Glimfeather's back, and was thoroughly waked up, for a while, by the unexpected coldness of the air when he flew out with her into the night. The moon had disappeared, and there were no stars. Far behind her she could see a single lighted window well above the ground, doubtless in one of the towers of Cair Paravel. It made her long to be back in that delightful bedroom, snug in bed, watching the firelight on the walls. She put her hands under her cloak and wrapped it tightly around her. It was uncanny to her to it was uncanny to hear two voices in the dark air a little distance away. Scrub and his owl were talking to one another. He doesn't sound tired, thought Jill. She did not realize that he had been on great adventures in that world before her, and that the Narnian air was bringing back to him a strength he had won when he had sailed to the eastern seas with King Caspian. Jill had to pinch herself to keep awake, for she knew that if she dozed on Glimfeather's back, she would probably fall off. When at last the two owls ended their flight, she climbed stiffly off Glimfeather and found herself on flat ground. A chilly wind was blowing, and they appeared to be in a place without trees. "To-hoo, to-hoo," Glimfeather was calling. "Wake up, Puddleglum, wake up. It is on the lion's business." For a long time there was no reply. Then a long way off, a dim light appeared and began to come nearer. With it came a voice. "Owls ahoy," it said. "What is this? Is the king dead? Has an enemy landed in Narnia? It is a flood, or dragons." When the light reached them, it turned out to be that of a large lantern. Jill could see very little of the person who held it. He seemed to be all legs and arms. The owls were talking to him, explaining everything, but she was too tired to listen. She tried to wake herself up a bit when she realized that they were saying goodbye to her. But she could never afterwards remember much except that, sooner or later, she and Scrub were stooping to enter a low doorway, and then, oh thank heavens, were laying down on something soft and warm, and a voice was saying, "There you are. Best we can do. You'll lie cold and hard. Damp too, I shouldn't wonder. Won't sleep a wink, most likely, even if there isn't a thunderstorm or a flood, or the wingwag doesn't fall down on top of us all, as I've known them to do. Must make the best of it." But she was fast asleep before the voice had ended. When the children woke late the next morning, they found that they were laying, very dry and warm, on beds of straw in a dark place. A triangular opening let in the daylight. "Where on earth are we?" asked Jill. "In the wigwam of a marsh wiggle," said Eustace. "A what?" "A marsh wiggle. Don't ask me what it is. I couldn't see it last night. I'm getting up. Let's go and look for it." "How beastly one feels after sleeping on one's clothes," said Jill, sitting up. "I was just thinking how nice it is not to have to dress," said Eustace. "Or wash either, I suppose," said Jill scornfully. But Scrub had already got up, yawned, shaken himself, and crawled out of the wigwam. Jill did the same. What they found outside was quite unlike the bit of Narnia that they had seen on the day before. They were on a great flat plain, which was cut into countless little islands by countless channels of water. The islands were covered with coarse grass and bordered with reeds and rushes. Sometimes there were beds of rushes about an acre in extent. Clouds of birds were constantly alighting in them and rising from them again. Duck, snipe, bitterns, herons, many wigwams like that in which they had passed the night could be seen dotted about, but all at a good distance from one another, for marsh wiggles are people who like privacy. Except for the fringe of the forest several miles to the south and west of them, there were not a tree in sight. Eastward, the flat marshes stretched to low sand hills on the horizon, and you could tell by the salt tang in the wind which blew from that direction that the sea lay close over there. To the north, there were low, pale-colored hills, in places bastioned with rock. The rest was all flat marsh. It would have been a depressing place on a wet evening. Seen under a morning sun, with a fresh wind blowing, and the air filled with the crying of birds, there was something fine and fresh and clean about its loneliness. The children felt their spirits rise. Where's the thing Gummy got to, I wonder?" said Jill. "The marsh wiggle," said Scrub, as if he were rather proud of knowing the word. "Except, hello, that must be him." And then they both saw him, sitting with his back to them, fishing about 50 yards away. He'd been hard to see at first because he was nearly the same color as the marsh, because he sat so still. I suppose we'd better go and speak to him, said Jill. Scrub nodded. They both felt a little nervous. As they drew nearer, the figure turned its head and showed them a long, thin face with rather sunken cheeks, a tightly shut mouth, a sharp nose, and no beard. He was wearing a high, pointed hat like a steeple, with an enormously wide, flat brim. The hair, if it could be called hair, which hung over his large ears, was greeny gray, and each lock was flat rather than round, so that they were like tiny reeds. His expression was solemn, his complexion muddy, and you could see at once that he took a serious view of life. Good morning, guests, he said. Though when I say good, I don't mean it won't probably turn to rain, or it might snow, or fog, or thunder. You didn't get any sleep, I dare say. Yes, we did, though, said Jill. We had a lovely night. Ah, said the Marsh Wriggle, shaking his head. I see you're making the best of a bad job. That's right. You've been well brought up, you have. You've learned to put good face on things. Please, we don't know your name, said Scrub. Puddleglum's my name, but it doesn't matter if you forget it. I can always tell you again. The children sat down on each side of him. They now saw that he had very long legs and arms, that although his body was not much bigger than a dwarf's, he would be taller than most men when he stood up. The fingers on his hands were webbed like frogs, and so were his bare feet, which dangled in the muddy water. He was dressed in earth-colored clothes that hung loose about him. I'm trying to catch a few eels to make an eel stew for our dinner, said Puddleglum. Though I shouldn't wonder if I didn't get any, and you won't like them much if I do. Why not? Why not? Said Scrub. Why, it's not in reason that you shouldn't like our sort of victuals, though I've no doubt you'll put a bold face on it. All the same, while I am catching them, you two could try to light the fire. No harm in trying. The wood's behind the wigwam. It might be wet. You could light it inside the wigwam, and then we'd all get the smoke in our eyes. Or you could light it outside, and then the rain would come and put it out. Here's my tinderbox. You won't know how to use it, I expect. But Scrub had learnt that sort of thing on his last adventure. The children ran back together towards the wigwam, found the wood, which was perfectly dry, and succeeded in lighting a fire with rather less than the usual difficulty. Then Scrub sat and took care of it, while Jill went and had some sort of a wash, not a very nice one, in the nearest channel. After that, she saw to the fire, and he had a wash. Both felt a good deal fresher, but very hungry. Presently, the Marsh Wriggle joined them. In spite of his expectation of catching no eels, he had a dozen or so, which he had already skinned and cleaned. He put a big pot on, mended the fire, and lit his pipe. Marsh Wiggles smoke a very strange, heavy sort of tobacco. Some people say they mix it with mud. And the children noticed the smoke from Puddleglum's pipe hardly rose in the air at all. It trickled out of the bowl and downwards and drifted along the ground like a mist. It was very black and set Scrub coughing. Now, said Puddleglum, those eels would take a mortal long time to cook, and either of you might faint with hunger before they're done. I know a little girl, but I'd better not tell you that story. It might lower your spirits, and that's the thing I never do. So, to keep your minds off your hunger, we might as well talk about our plans. Yes, do, let's, said Jill. Can you help us find Prince Rillian? The Marsh Wiggles sucked in his cheeks till they were hollower than you would have thought possible. Well, I don't know that you'd call it help, he said. I don't know that anyone can exactly help. It stands to reason we're not likely to get very far on a journey to the north, not at this time of the year, when the winter's coming on soon and all, and an early winter too, by the look of things. But you mustn't let that make you downhearted. Very likely, what with enemies and mountains and rivers to cross, and losing our way, and next to nothing. Yo, hi, Necrome. And next to nothing to eat, and sore feet. We'd hardly notice the weather, and if you don't get far enough to do any good, we might as well get far enough not to get back in a hurry. Both children noticed that he said we and not you, and both exclaimed at the same moment, Are you coming with us? Oh yes, I'm coming, of course. Might as well, you see. I don't suppose we shall ever see the king back in Narnia, now that once he's set off for foreign parts, as he has a nasty cough when he left. Then there's Trumpkin, he's failing fast, and you'll find there'll be a bad harvest after this terrible dry summer. And I shouldn't wonder if some enemy attacked us, mark my words. And how shall we start, said Scrub. Well, said the Marsh Wriggle very slowly, all the others who ever went looking for Prince Rillian Started from the same fountain where the Lord Drinian saw the lady. They went north mostly, and none of them ever came back. Can't exactly say how they got on. We've got to start by finding a ruined city of giants, said Jill. Aslan said so. Got to start by finding it, have we? Answered Puddleglum. Not allowed to start by looking for it, I suppose? That's what I meant, of course, said Jill. And then when we found it... Yes, when, said Puddleglum very dryly. Doesn't anyone know where it is, said Scrub. I don't know about anyone, said Puddleglum. And I won't say I haven't heard of that ruined city. You wouldn't start from the fountain, though. You'd have to go across Ettonsmoor. That's where the ruined city is, if it's anywhere. But I've been as far in that direction as most people, and I've never got to any ruins, so I won't deceive you. Where's Ettonsmoor? Said Scrub. Look over there northward, said Puddleglum, pointing with his pipe. See those hills and bits of cliff? That's the beginning of Ettonsmoor. There's a river between it and us, the river Shribble. No bridges, of course. I suppose we can ford it, though, said Scrub. Well, it has been forded, admitted the Marsh Wiggle. Perhaps we shall meet people on Ettonsmoor who can tell us the way, said Jill. You're right about meeting people, said Puddleglum. What sort of people live there? She asked. It's not for me to say they aren't all right in their own way, answered Puddleglum. If you like their way. Yes, but what are they? Pressed Jill. There are so many strange creatures in this country. I mean, are they animals, or birds, or dwarves, or what? Marsh Wiggle gave a long whistle. Ew, he said. Don't you know? I thought the owls had told you. They're giants. Jill winced. She never liked giants, even in books, and she had once met one in a nightmare. Then she saw Scribble's face, which had turned rather green. Scrub's face, which had turned rather green, and thought to herself, I bet he's in a worse funk than I am. That made her feel better. The king told me long ago, said Scrub, the time when I was with him at sea, that he'd jolly well beaten those giants in a war and made them pay him tribute. That's true enough, said Puddleglum. They're at peace with us, all right, as long as we stay on our side of the Shribble, and they won't do us any harm. Over on their side, on the moor, still, there's a chance. If we don't get any nearer them, if none of them forget themselves, and if we're not seen, it's just possible we might get a long way. Look here, said Scrub suddenly, losing his temper, as people so easily do when they have been frightened. I don't believe the whole thing can be half as bad as you're making out. And more than the beds in the wigwam were hard or the wood was wet, I don't think Aslan would ever have sent us there if it was so little chances as all that. He quite expected the Marsh Wiggle to give him an angry reply, but he only said, That's the spirit, Scrub. That's the way to talk. Put a good face on it. But we all need to be very careful about our tempers, seeing all the hard times we shall have to go through together. Won't do to quarrel, you know. At any rate, don't begin too soon. I know these expeditions usually end that way, knifing one another, I shouldn't wonder, before all's done, but the longer we can keep off of it. Well, if you find it so hopeless, interrupted Scrub, I think you'd better stay behind. Pole and I can go on alone, can't we, Pole? Shut up and don't be such an ass, Scrub, said Jill hastily, terrified lest the Marsh Wiggle should take him on his word. Don't you lose heart, Pole, said Puddleglum. I'm coming, sure and certain. I'm not going to lose an opportunity like this. It will do me good. They all say, the other Wiggles all say, that I'm too flighty, don't take life seriously enough. They've said it once, they've said it 1,000 times. Puddleglum, they've said, you're altogether too full of buoyance and bounce and high spirits. You got to learn that life isn't all fricasseed, frogs, and eel pie. You want something to sober you down a bit. I'm only saying it for your own good. That's what they say. Now, a job like this, a journey up north just as winter's beginning, looking for a prince who probably isn't there, by way of a ruined city that no one has ever seen, will be just the thing. If that doesn't steady a chap, I don't know what ever will. And he rubbed his big frog-like hands together as if it were talking of going to a party or a pantomime. Kathis, you're gonna need to moderate. You have a banhammer to smash down. Oh, ironically, his name is Earthly Sledgehammer. Well, he's about to get smashed by a hammer. The banhammer. And now, he added, let's see how those eels are getting on. When the meal came, it was delicious, and the children had 2 large helpings each. At first, the Marsh Wiggle wouldn't believe that they really liked it. When they had eaten so much that he had to believe them, he fell back on saying that it would probably disagree with them horribly. What's food for Wiggles may be poison for humans, I shouldn't wonder, he said. After the meal, they had tea in tins, as you've seen men having it who are working on the road, and Puddleglum had a good many sips out of a square black bottle. He offered the children some of it, but they thought it very nasty. The rest of the day was spent in preparations for an early start the next morning. Puddleglum, being far the biggest, said he would carry 3 blankets, with a large bit of bacon rolled up inside them. Jill was to carry the remains of the eels, some biscuit, and the tinderbox. Scrub was to carry both his own cloak and Jill's when they didn't want to wear them. Scrub, who had learned some shooting when he sailed to the east under Caspian, had Puddleglum's second best bow, and Puddleglum had his best one. Though he said that... Yeah, okay. Though he had said... My goodness. Though he said that what with winds and damp bowstrings and bad light and cold fingers, it was 100 to 1 against either of them hitting anything. He and Scrub both had swords. Scrub had brought the one which had been left out for him in his room at Cairparavel, but Jill had to be content with her knife. There would have been a quarrel about this, but as soon as they started sparring, the Wiggle rubbed his hands and said, "Ah, there you are. I thought as much. That's what usually happens on adventures." This made them both shut up. Nothing quite like shutting in an argument is somebody being excited to see you argue. All 3 went to bed early in the wigwam. This time the children really had a rather bad night. That was because Puddleglum, after saying, "You'd better try for some sleep, you 2. Not that I suppose any of us will close an eye tonight," instantly went off in such a loud, continuous snore that when Jill at last got to sleep, she dreamed all night about road drills and waterfalls and being in express trains in tunnels. Chapter 6: The Wild Wastelands of the North. At about 9 o'clock the next morning, 3 lonely figures might have been seen picking their way across the shribble by the shoals and stepping stones. It was a shallow, noisy stream, and even Jill was not wet above her knees when they reached the northern bank. About 50 yards ahead, the land rose up to the beginnings of the moor, everywhere steeply and often in cliffs. I suppose that's our way, said Scrub, pointing left and west to where a stream flowed down from the moor through the shallow gorge. But the Marsh Wiggle shook his head. The giants mainly live along the side of the gorge, he said. You might say the gorge was like the street to them. We do better straight ahead, even though it's a bit steep. They found a place where they could scramble up, and in about 10 minutes stood panting at the top. They cast a longing look back at the valley land of Narnia, and then turned their faces to the north. The vast, lonely moor stretched up and on as far as they could see. On their left was rockier ground. Jill thought that it must be the edge of the giant's gorge. He did not much care about looking in that direction. They set out. It was good, springy ground for walking, and a day of pale winter sunlight. As they got deeper into the moor, the loneliness increased. One could hear pewits and see an occasional hawk. When they halted in the middle of the morning for a rest and a drink in a little hollow by a stream, Jill was beginning to feel that she might enjoy adventures after all, and she said so. We haven't had any yet, said the Marsh Wiggle. Walks after the first halt, like school mornings after a break or railway journeys after changing trains, never go on as they were before. When they set out again, Joan noticed that the rocky edge of the gorge had drawn nearer, as the rocks were less flat, more upright than they had been. In fact, they were like little towers of rocks, and what funny shapes they were. I do believe, thought Jill, that all the stories about giants might have come from those funny rocks. If you were coming along here when it was half dark, you could easily think those piles of rocks were giants. Look at that one now. You could always imagine that the lump on top was a head. It would be rather too big for the body, but I suppose it would do well enough for an ugly giant. And all that bushy stuff, I suppose it's heather and birds' nests, really, would do quite well for hair and beard. And the things sticking out on each side are quite like ears. They'd be horribly big, but then I dare say giants would have big ears like elephants and... Oh! Her blood froze. The thing moved. It was a real giant. There were no mistaking it. She'd seen it turn its head. She'd caught a glimpse of the great, stupid, puff-cheeked face. All the things were giants, not rocks. There were 40 or 50 of them, all in a row, obviously standing with their feet on the bottom of the gorge and their elbows resting on the edge of the gorge, just as men might stand leaning on a wall, lazy men, on a fine morning after breakfast. Keep straight on, whispered Puddleglum, who had noticed them too. Don't look at them. Whatever you do, don't run. They'd all be after us in a moment. So they kept on, pretending not to have seen the giants. It was like walking past the gate of a house where there is a fierce dog, only far worse. There were dozens and dozens of these giants. They didn't look angry or kind or interested in all. There was no sign that they had even seen the travelers. Then, whiss, 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 some heavy object came hurtling past the air. With a crash, and a big boulder fell about 20 paces ahead of them. And then, thud, another fell 20 feet behind. Are they aiming at us? Said Scrub. No, said Puddleglum. We'd be a good deal safer if they were. They're trying to hit that cairn over there to the right. They won't hit it, you know. It's safe enough. They're such bad shots. They play cockshivs most fine mornings. About the only game they're clever enough to understand. It was a horrible time. There seemed no end to the line of giants. They never ceased hurling stones, some of which fell extremely close. Quite apart from the real danger, the very sight and sound of their faces and voices was enough to scare anyone. Jill tried not to look at them. After about 25 minutes, the giants apparently had a quarrel. This put an end to the clock sheaves, but it's not pleasant to be within a mile of quarreling giants. They stormed and jeered at one another in long, meaningless words, at about 20 syllables each. They foamed and gibbered and jumped in their rage, and each jump shook the earth like a bomb. They lammed each other on the head with great, clumsy stone hammers, but their skulls were so hard that the hammers bounced off again, and then the monster who had given the blow would drop his hammer and howl with pain because it had stung his fingers, but he was so stupid that he would do exactly the same thing a minute later. This was a good thing in the long run, for by the end of an hour all giants were so hurt that they sat down and began to cry. When they sat down, their heads were below the edge of the gorge, so that you saw them no more. Jill could hear them howling and blubbering and boo-hooing like great babies, even after the place was a mile behind. That night, they bivouacked, the word again, on the bare moor, and Puddleglum showed the children how to make the best of their blankets by sleeping back to back. Backs keep each other warm, and you can then have both blankets on top. But it was chilly even so, and the ground was hard and lumpy. Marshwiggle told them that it would feel more comfortable if only they thought of how much colder it would be later on and farther north, but this didn't cheer them up at all. They traveled across Ettin's Moor for many days, saving the bacon and living chiefly on the moorfowl. They were not, of course, talking birds, which Eustace and the Wiggle shot. Jill rather envied Eustace for being able to shoot. He'd learned it on his voyage with King Caspian. As there were countless streams on the moor, they were never short of water. Jill thought that when in books people lived on what they shot, it tells you what a long, smelly, messy job it is plucking and cleaning dead birds, and how cold it makes your fingers. But the great thing was that they met hardly any giants. One giant saw them, but he only roared with laughter and stumped away about his own business. About the 10th day, they reached a place where the country changed. They came to the northern edge of the moor and looked down a long, steep slope into a different and grimmer land. At the bottom of the slope were cliffs, beyond these a country of high mountains, dark precipices, stony valleys, ravines so deep and narrow that one could not see far into them, and rivers that poured out of echoing gorges to plunge suddenly into black depths. Needless to say, it was Puddleglum who pointed out a sprinkling of snow on the more distant slopes. But there will be more of them on the north side of them, I shouldn't wonder, he added. It took them some time to reach the foot of the slope, and when they did, they looked down from the top of the cliff at a river running below them from west to east. It was walled in by precipices on the far side, as well as on their own, and it was green and sunless, full of rapids and waterfalls. The roar of it shook the earth, even where they stood. Bright side of it is, said Puddleglum, that if we break our necks getting down the cliff, then we're safe from being drowned in the river. What about that? Said Scrub suddenly, pointing upstream to their left. Then they all looked and saw the last thing they were expecting. Bridge. And what a bridge, too! It was a huge single arch that spanned the gorge from cliff to cliff, cliff top to cliff top. And the crown of that arch was a high, and the crown of that arch was as high above the cliff tops as the dome of St. Paul's is above the street. Why, it must be a giant's bridge, said Jill. Or a sorcerer's, more likely, said Puddleglum. We've got to look out for enchantments in a place like this. I think it's a trap. I think it'll turn to mist and melt away just when we're at the middle of it. Oh, for goodness sakes, don't be such a wet blanket, said Scrub. Why on earth shouldn't it be a proper bridge? Do you think any of the giants we've seen would have the sense to build a thing like that, said Puddleglum. But mightn't it have been built by other giants? Said Jill. I mean, by giants who lived hundreds of years ago and were far cleverer than the modern kind. It might have been built by the same ones who built the giant city we're looking for, and that would mean we were on the right track, the old bridge leading to the old city. That's a real brainwave pull, said Scrub. It must be that. Come on. So they turned and went to the bridge, and when they reached it, it certainly seemed solid enough. The single stones were as big as those at Stonehenge and must have been squared by good masons once, though now they were cracked and crumbled. The balustrade had apparently been covered with rich carvings on which some traces remained, mouldering faces and forms of giants, minotaurs, squids, centipedes, and dreadful gods. Puddleglum still didn't trust it, but he consented to cross it with the children. The climb up to the crown of the arch was long and heavy. In many places the giant stones had dropped out, leaving horrible gaps through which you looked down on the river, foaming thousands of feet below. They saw an eagle fly through under their feet. And the higher they went, the colder it grew, and the wind blew so that they could hardly keep their footing. It seemed to shake the bridge. When they reached the top and could look down the farther slope of the bridge, they saw what looked like the remains of an ancient, giant road stretching away before them into the heart of the mountains. Many stones on its pavings were missing, and there were wide patches of grass between those that remained. And riding towards them on that ancient road were two people of normal grown-up human size. Keep on. Move towards them, said Puddleglum. Anyone you meet in a place like this is as likely not to be an enemy, but we mustn't let them think we're afraid. By the time they had stepped off the edge of the bridge onto the grass, the two strangers were quite close. One was a knight in complete armor, with his visor down. His armor and his horse were black. There was no device on his shield and no banneret on his spear. The other was a lady on a white horse. I bet it's the prince and the witch. So lovely that you might like to kiss its nose and give it a lump of sugar at once. But the lady, who rode side saddle and wore a long fluttering dress of dazzling green, was lovelier still. Good day, travelers, she cried out in a voice as sweet as the sweetest bird's song, trilling her R's delightfully. Some of you are young pilgrims to walk this rough waste. That as may be, ma'am, said Puddleglum very stiffly and on his guard. We're looking for the ruined city of the giants, said Jill. The ruined city, said the lady. That is a strange place to be seeking. What will you do if you find it? We've got to, began Jill, but Puddleglum interrupted. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but we don't know you or your friend. Silent chap, isn't he? You don't know us, and we'd as soon as not talk to strangers about our business, if you don't mind. Still, shall we have a little rain soon, do you think? The lady laughed, the richest, most musical laugh you can imagine. Well, children, she said, you have a wise, solemn old guide with you. I think none the worse of him for keeping his own counsel. But I'll be free with mine. I have often heard the name of the giantess city, ruinous, but never met any who could tell me the way thither. This road leads to the borough and castle of Harfang, where dwells the gentle giants. They are as mild, civil, prudent, and courteous as those of Ettonsmoor are foolish, fierce, savage, and given to all beastliness. And in Harfang you may or may not hear tidings of the city ruinous, but certainly you shall find good lodgings and merry hosts. You would be wise to winter there, or, at the least, to tarry certain days for your ease and refreshment. There you shall have steaming baths, soft beds, and bright hearths, and the roast and the baked and the sweet and the strong will be on the table 4 times a day. I say, exclaimed Scrub, that's something like. think of slipping think of sleeping in a bed again. Yes, and having a hot bath, said Jill. Do you think they'll ask us to stay? We don't know them, you see. Only tell them, said the lady, that she of the green kirtle salutes them by you, and has sent them two fair southern children for the autumn feast. No, that's not suspicious. Oh, thank you ever so much, said Jill and Scrub. But have a care, said the lady, on whatever day you reach Harfang, that you come not to the door too late, for they shut their gates a few hours after noon, and it is the custom of the castle that they open to none once they have drawn the bolt, however hard he knock. The children thanked her again, with shining eyes, and the lady waved to them. The Marsh Wiggle took off his steepled hat and bowed very stiffly. Then the silent knight and the lady started walking their horses up the slope of the bridge with a great clatter of hoofs. Well, said Puddleglum, I'd give a good deal to know where she's come from and where she's going. Not the sort you'd expect to meet in the wilds of Giantland, is she? Up to no good, I'll be bound. Oh, rot, said Scrub. I thought she was simply super. And think of hot meals and warm rooms. I do hope Harfang isn't a long ways off. Same here, said Jill. And hadn't she a scrumptious dress? And the horse? All the same, said Puddleglum. I wish you knew a bit more about her. I was going to ask her all about herself, said Jill, but how could I when you wouldn't tell her anything about us? Yes, said Scrub. Why were you so stiff and unpleasant? Didn't you like them? Them, said the Wiggle. Who's them? I only saw one. Didn't you see the knight? Asked Jill. I saw a suit of armor, said Puddleglum. Why didn't he speak? I expect he was shy, said Jill. Or perhaps he just wants to look at her and listen to her lovely voice. I'm sure I would if I was with him. If I was him. I was wondering, remarked Puddle, what you'd really see if you lifted up the visor of that helmet and looked inside. Hang it all, said Scrub. Think of the shape of the armor. What could be inside? My goodness. What could be inside except a man? How about a skeleton? Asked the Marsh Wiggle with a ghastly cheerfulness. Or perhaps, he added in afterthought, nothing at all. I mean, nothing you could see. Something invisible. Really, Puddleglum, said Jill with a shudder, you do have the most horrible ideas. How do you think of them all? Bother his ideas, said Scrub. He's always expecting the worst, and he's always wrong. Let's think about those gentle giants, and get on to Harfang as quickly as we can. I wish I knew how far it is. What were the things? Hell, I've forgotten what Aslan told her. I want to refresh her. I'll refresh her in the ads. Okay, and now they nearly had the first of those quarrels which Puddleglum had foretold. Not that Jill and Scrub hadn't been sparring and snapping at each other a good deal before, but this was the first really serious disagreement. Puddleglum didn't want them to go to Harfang at all. He said they didn't know what a giant's idea of being gentle might be, and that anyway, Aslan's sign said nothing about staying with giants, gentle or otherwise. The children, on the other hand, were sick of wind and rain, and skinny fowl roasted over campfires, and hard cloth earth to sleep on. Were absolutely dead set to visit the gentle giants in the end. Puddleglum agreed to do so, but only on one condition. The others must give an absolute promise that, unless he gave them leave, they would not tell the gentle giants that they came from Narnia, or that they were looking for Prince Rilian, and they gave him this promise and went on. After that talk with the lady, things got worse in two different ways. In the first place, the country was much harder. The road led through endless narrow valleys down which a crude north wind was always blowing in their faces. There was nothing that could be used for firewood. There were no nice little hollows to camp in, and as there had been on the moor, and the ground was all stony, and made your feet sore by day, and every bit of you sore by night. In the second place, whatever the lady had intended by telling them about Harfang, the actual effect on the children was a bad one. They could think about nothing but beds and baths and hot meals, and how lovely it would be to get indoors. They never talked about Aslan, or even about the lost prince now, and Jill gave up her habit of repeating the signs over to herself every night and morning. She said to herself at first that she was too tired, but she soon forgot all about it. And though you might have expected that the idea of having a good time at Harfang would have made them more cheerful, it really made them more sorry for themselves, more grumpy and snappy with each other and with Puddleglum. What are our ads at now? Oh. At last they came one afternoon to a place where the gorge in which they were traveling widened out, and dark fir woods rose on either side. They looked ahead and saw that they had come through the mountain. Before them lay a desolate, rocky plain. Beyond it, further mountains capped with snow, but between them and those further mountains rose a low hill with an irregular, flattish top. Look, look! Cried Jill, and pointed across the plain, and there, through the gathering dusk, from beyond the flat hill, everyone saw lights. Lights! Not moonlight, nor fires, but a homely, cheering row of lighted windows. If you had never been in the wild wilderness day and night for weeks, you would have hardly understand how they felt. Harfang, cried Scrub and Jill in glad, excited voices. Harfang, repeated Puddleglum in a dull, gloomy voice. But he added, hello, wild geese, and had the bow off his shoulder in a second. He brought down a good fat goose. It was far too late to think of reaching Harfang that day, but they had a hot meal and a fire, and started the night warmer than they had been for over a week. After the fire had gone out, the night grew bitterly cold, and when they woke the next morning, their blankets were stiff with frost. Never mind, said Jill, stamping her feet. Hot baths tonight. Are we at the end now? Cool, because that was the end of chapter 6. Now I want to reread these lines. Where are we? Do declare. Let's see. I'll tell you. As soon as the boy Eustace sets foot in Narnia, he will meet an old man, an old and dear friend. You must greet that friend at once. If he does, you will both have good help. You must journey out of Narnia to the north till you come to the ruined city of ancient giants. Then you will find a writing on a stone in that ruined city. Do what the writing tells you. You will know the lost prince if you find him by this, and he will be the first person you have met in your travels. Will ask you to do something in my name, in the name of Aslan. Okay. The silver chair. What time is it? 11 o'clock. I think I'll read one chapter, and I might call it because we are actually over a third of the way through the silver chair already, and that would put us at about 11:30. I think my voice is also starting to go again. I think you can get one more chapter. Now things in the world are crazy. It's okay to sometimes sleep bedtime. You will tell me when. Cuddle up. I know. Chapter 7. The Hill of the Strange Trenches. There was no denying it was a beast of a day. Overhead was a sunless sky, muffled in clouds that were heavy with snow. Underfoot, a black frost. Pardon me. Blowing over it, a wind that felt as if it would take your skin off. When they got down into the plains, they found that this part of the ancient road was much more ruinous than any they had yet seen. They had to pick their way over great broken stones, between boulders and across rubble, hard going for sore feet. And however tired they got, it was far too cold for a halt. At about 10 o'clock, the first tiny snowflakes came loitering down and settled on Jill's arm. 10 minutes later, they were falling quite thickly. In 20 minutes, the ground was noticeably white. By the end of half an hour, a good steady snowstorm, which looked as if it meant to last all day, was driving in their faces so that they could hardly see. In order to understand what followed, you must keep on remembering how little they could see. As they drew near the low hill which separated them from the place where the lighted windows had appeared, they had no general view of it at all. It was a question of seeing the next few paces ahead, and even for that, you had to screw up your eyes. Needless to say, they were not talking. When they reached the foot of the hill, they caught a glimpse of what might be rocks on either side. Squarish rocks, if you look at them carefully, no one did. All were more concerned with the ledge right in front of them, which barred their way. It was about 4 feet high. The marsh wiggle with his long legs had no difficulty in jumping onto the top of it, and he then helped the others up. It was a nasty, wet business. Wet business for them, but not for him, because the snow now lay quite deep on the ledge. They then had a stiff climb. Jill fell once, very rough ground for about 100 yards. Came to a second ledge. There were 4 of these ledges altogether, at quite irregular intervals. As they struggled onto the 4th ledge, there was no mistaking the fact that they were now at the top of a flat hill. Up till now, the slope had given them some shelter. Here, they got the full fury of the wind, for the hill, oddly enough, was quite as flat on top as it had looked from a distance. Great level tableland, which the storm tore across without resistance. In most places, the snow was still hardly laying at all, for the wind kept catching it up off the ground in sheets and clouds and hurling it in their faces. And around their feet, little eddies of snow ran about, as you sometimes see them doing over ice. And indeed, in many places, the surface was almost as smooth as ice. But to make matters worse, it was crossed and crisscrossed with curious banks and dikes, which sometimes divvied it up into squares and oblongs. All these, of course, had to be climbed. They varied from 2 to 5 feet in height, and were about a couple yards thick. On the north side of each bank, the snow always lay in deep drifts, and after each climb, you came down into a drift and got wet. Fighting her way forward with hood up and head down and numb hands inside her cloak, Jill had glimpses of other odd things on that horrible tableland. I want to be able to see chat. Here we go. Jill had caught glimpses of other odd things on that horrible tableland. Things on her right that looked vaguely like factory chimneys, and on her left, huge cliffs straighter than any cliff ought to be. But she wasn't at all interested in give them a thought. The only thing she thought about were cold hands, and nose and chin and ears, hot baths and beds at Harvey. Suddenly she slid about 5 feet, and found herself, to her horror, sliding down into a dark, narrow chasm which seemed that moment to have appeared in front of her. Half a second later, she had reached the bottom. It appeared to be in a kind of trench or groove, only about 3 feet wide. Though she was shaken by the fall, almost the first thing she noticed was the relief of being out of the wind. The walls of the trench rose high above her. The next thing she noticed was, naturally, the anxious faces of Scrub and Puddleglum looking down at her from the edge. "Are you hurt, Pole?" shouted Scrub. "Both legs broken, I shouldn't wonder," shouted Puddleglum. Jill stood up and explained that she was all right. They'd have to help her out. "What is it you've fallen into?" asked Scrub. "It's kind of trench, or it might be a kind of sunken lane or something," said Jill. "It runs quite straight." "Yes, by Jove," said Scrub, "and it runs due north. I wonder, Is it a sort of road? If it was, we'd be out of the infernal wind down there. Is there a lot of snow at the bottom? Hardly at all. It all blows over the top, I suppose. What happens further on? Have a sec, I'll go see, said Jill. She got up and walked along the trench, but before she'd gotten far, it turned sharply to the right. She shouted this information back to the others. What's round the corner? Asked Scrub. Now it happened that Jill had the same feeling about twisty passages and dark places underground, or even nearly underground, that Scrub had about edges and cliffs. She had no intention of going round that corner alone, especially when she heard Puddleglum bawling from behind her. Be careful, Pole. It's just the sort of place that might come lead to a dragon's cave, and in a giant country there might be giant earthworms or giant beetles. I don't think it goes anywhere much, said Jill, coming hastily back. Well, I'm jolly well going to have a look, said Scrub. What do you mean by anywhere much? I should like to know. So we sat down on the edge of the trench. Everyone was too wet by now to bother about being a bit wetter, and then dropped in. He pushed past Jill, though he didn't say anything. Felt sure he knew she had funked it, so she followed him closely, but took care not to get in front of him. It proved, however, a disappointing exploration. They went round the right-hand turn, straight on for a few paces. Here there was a choice of ways, straight or go on again, or sharp to the right. That's no good, she said. Rob glanced down the right-hand turn. That would be taking us back south. He went straight on. Once more, in a few steps, they found a second turn to the right, but this time there was no choice of ways, for the wrench they had been following here came to a dead end. Oh, good, grunted Scrub. Jill lost no time in turning and leading the way back. When they returned to the place where Jill had first fallen in, the marsh wiggle with his long arms had no difficulty in pulling them out. But it was dreadful to be out on top again. Down in those narrow slits of trenches, the ears had almost begun to thaw. They had been able to see clearly and breathe easily and hear each other speak without shouting. It was absolute misery to come back into the withering coldness, and it did seem hard when Puddleglum chose that moment for saying, Are you still sure those signs pull? What's the one we ought to be after now? Oh, come on. Bother the signs, said Pole. Something about someone mentioning Aslan's name, I think, but I'm jolly well not going to give a recitation here. As you see, she had got the order wrong. That was because she had given up saying the signs over every night. She still really knew them, if she troubled to think. She was no longer so pat in her lesson as to be sure of reeling them off in the right order at the moment's notice and without thinking. Puddleglum's question annoyed her, because deep down inside her, she was already annoyed with herself for not knowing the lion's lesson quite so well as she felt she ought to have known it. This annoyance, added to the misery of being very cold and tired, made her made her say, Bother the signs. She didn't perhaps quite mean it. Oh, that was next, was it? Said Puddleglum. Now I wonder, are you right? Lot of mixed, I shouldn't wonder. Seems to me this flat place we're on, is worth stopping to have a look. Have you noticed? Oh, Lord, said Scrub. Is this the time for stopping and admiring the view? For goodness sake, let's get on. Oh, look, cried Jill and pointed. Everyone turned, and everyone saw, some way off to the north, a good deal higher up than the table end which they stood, a line of lights had appeared, this time even more obvious than when the travelers had seen them the night before. They were windows, smaller windows that made one think deliciously of bedrooms, and larger windows that made one think of great halls, with fires roaring on the hearths, and hot soups or juicy sirloins smoking on the table. Harfang, exclaimed Scrub. Excuse me. That's all very well, said Puddleglum, but what I was saying was— Oh, shut up, said Jill crossly. We haven't a moment to lose. Don't you remember what the ladies said about their locking up so early? We must get there in time. We must. We'll die if we're shut out in the night like this. Well, it isn't exactly at night, not yet, began Puddleglum. The two children both said, Come on, and began stumbling forwards on the slippery tableland as quickly as their legs would carry them. The marsh wiggle followed them, still talking. Now that they were forcing their way into the wind again, they could not have heard him even if they had wanted to. And they didn't want. They were thinking of baths, beds, and hot drinks, and the idea of coming to Harfang too late and being shut out was almost unbearable. In spite of their haste, it took them a long time to cross the flat top of that hill, and even when they had crossed it, there were still several ledges to climb down on the far side. But at last they reached the bottom and could see what Harfang was like. It stood on a high crag, and in spite of its many towers, was more a huge house than a castle. Obviously, the gentle giants feared no attack. There were windows on the outside wall, quite close to the ground, a thing no one would have in a serious fortress. There were even odd little doors here and there, so that it would be quite easy to get in and out of the castle without going through the courtyard. This raised the spirits of Jill and Scrub, and made the whole place look more friendly and less foreboding. At first, the height and steepness of the crag frightened them, but presently they noticed that there was an easier way up on the left, and that the road wound up towards it. It was a terrible climb after the journey they had already had, and Jill nearly gave up. Scrub and Puddleglum help her had to help her for the last 100 yards, but in the end they stood before the castle gate. The portcullis was up and the gate open. However tired you are, it takes some nerve to walk up to a giant's front door. In spite of all her previous warnings against Harfang, in spite of all his previous warnings against Harfang, it was Puddleglum who showed most courage. Steady pace now, he said. Don't look frightened, whatever you do. We've done the silliest thing in the world by coming at all, but now that we are here, we best put a bold face on it. With these words, he strode forwards into the gateway, stood under the arch where the echo would help his voice, and called out as loud as he could, "Oh, porter, guests who seek lodging." And while he was waiting for someone to answer something to happen, he took off his hat and knocked off a heavy mass of snow which had gathered on its wide brim. "I say," whispered Scrub to Jill, "he may be a wet blanket, but he has plenty of pluck and cheek." A door opened, letting out a delicious glow of firelight, and the porter appeared. Jill bit her lip for fear she would scream. He was not a perfectly enormous giant. That is to say, he was rather taller than an apple tree, but nothing like so tall as a telegraph pole. He had bristly red hair, a leathery jerkin with metal plates fastened all over it, so as to make a kind of mail shirt. Bare knees, very hairy indeed, and things like puttees on his legs. He stooped down and goggled at Puddleglum. "And what sort of creature do you call yourself?" he said. Jill took her courage in both hands. "Please," she said, shouting up at the giant, "the Lady of the Green Kirtles salutes the King of the Gentle Giants. He has sent us 2 southern children and this marsh-wiggle, his name's Puddleglum, to your autumn feast. It is quite convenient, if it's quite convenient, of course," she added. "Oh ho," said the porter, "that's quite a different story. Come in, little people, come in. You'd best come into the lodge while I'm sending word to his majesty." He looked at the children with curiosity. "Blue faces," he said. "I don't know they were that color. Don't care about it myself, but I dare say you look quite nice to one another. Beetles fancy other beetles, they do say." "Our faces are only blue with cold," said Jill. "We're not this color, really." "Come in and get warm, and little shrimps," said the porter. They followed him into the lodge, and though it was rather terrible to hear such a big door clang shut behind them, they forgot about it as soon as they saw the thing they had been longing for ever since supper time the previous night. Fire. And such a fire. It looked as if 4 or 5 whole trees were blazing on it, and it was so hot they couldn't go within a yards of it. But they all flopped down on the brick floor as near as they could bear the heat, heaved great sighs of relief. "Now, youngsters," said the porter to another giant, who had been sitting in the back of the room, staring at the visitors, so it looked as if his eyes would start out of his head. "Run across with this message to the house." He repeated what Jill had said to him. The younger giant, after a final stare and a great guffaw, left the room. "Now, Froggy," said the porter to Puddleglum, "you look as if you wanted some cheering up." He produced a black bottle very like Puddleglum's own, but about 20 times larger. Let me see," said the porter. "I can't give you a cup or you'll drown yourself. You see, this salt cellar will be just the thing. You needn't mention it over at the house. The silver will keep on getting over here, and it's not my fault." The salt cellar was not very like one of ours, being narrower and more upright, made quite a good cup for when the giant set it down on the floor beside him. The children expected Puddleglum to refuse it, distrusting the gentle giants as he did. But he muttered, "Rather late to be thinking of precautions now that we're inside the door shut behind us." Then he sniffed at the liquor. "Smells all right," he said. "That's nothing to go by. Best make sure." He took a sip. Tastes all right too, he said, but it might be that the first sip. How does it go on? He took a larger sip. Ah, he said, but it is the same all the way down. He took another. There will be something nasty at the bottom, I shouldn't wonder, he said, and finished the drink. He licked his lips and remarked to the children, "This will be a test, you see. If I curl up or burst or turn into a lizard or something, then you'll know not to take anything they offer you." The giant, who was too far up to hear the things Puddleglum was saying under his breath, roared with laughter and said, "Why, Froggy, you're a man. See him put it away." "Not a man, not a man, Marshwiggle," replied Puddleglum, in a sort of indistinct voice. "Not frog either, Marshwiggle." At that moment the door opened behind him, and the younger giant came in, saying, "They're to go to the throne room at once." The children stood up, but Puddleglum remained sitting and said, "Marshwiggle, Marshwiggle, very respectable. Marshwiggle, respectawiggle." "Show them the way, young'un," said the giant porter. "You better carry Froggy. He's had a drop more than it's good for him." "Nothing wrong with me," said Puddleglum. "Not a frog, nothing frog with me. I'm a respectable." But the young giant caught him up by the waist and signed to the children to follow. In this undignified way they crossed the courtyard. Puddleglum held in the giant's fist, and a vaguely kicking in the air did certainly look like a frog. But they had little time to notice this, for they soon entered the great doorway of the main castle. Both their hearts were beating faster than usual, and, after pattering along several corridors at a trot to keep up with the giant's paces, found themselves blinking in the light of an enormous room, where lamps glowed and a fire roared on the hearth, and both were reflected from the gilding of roof and cornice. More giants than they could count stood on their left and right, and all in magnificent robes, and on two thrones on the far left sat two huge shapes that appeared to be the king and queen. About 20 feet from their thrones they stopped. Rob and Jill made an awkward attempt at a bow. Girls are not taught how to curtsy at Experiment House. And the young giant carefully put Puddleglum down on the floor, where he collapsed into a sort of sitting position. With his long limbs, he looked, to tell the truth, uncommonly like a large spider. And that is the end of chapter 7. I think we are going to call it for tonight, because I'm starting to get tired and I'm starting to slur words. I appreciate you guys for tuning in and listening, and I hope to see you again next Sunday. Any of you who are asleep, I hope you have wonderful dreams. Bye.